Hello, the live stream is gonna start very soon, but before that big mouth starts talking, I wanna tell you about the secret art of game mastery. That's the next DM Lair Kickstarter. Listen, game masters are the heart of all tabletop games because frankly, without you, there would be no game. Your players would just sit there and stare at each other and no one would know what to do. And yet, game mastering can often be challenging and overwhelming. I know, I tried it. I'm still dealing with the trauma from that experience. But anyway, that's why the DM Lair team has taken their accumulated experience as game masters in a plethora of game systems, over 100 years of combined experience, that's a lot of finger counting, and put it all into one book, The Secret Art of Game Mastery. Whether you're a seasoned game master or a brand new one, we want to help you run amazing games for your players. And in this book, we'll guide you in the secret art of game mastery. Trust me, it's super secret. These are the things that you often don't find in other game master guides. Oh, and everything in this book is system agnostic. That's a big word that means the information will work for any game system you want to run, be it Pathfinder, D&D, Call of Cthulhu, Shadowrun, Savage Worlds, or something else. The Secret Art of Game Mastery Kickstarter launches in August, but if you click the link below, you can follow the project and get notified when it goes live. So yeah, do that right now. Clicky.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the live stream. I'm joined here by the illustrious Mark Seifter,
Hello,
co-creator of Pathfinder 2. So he's going to drop some knowledge bombs tonight. We're going to be talking about game mastering in Pathfinder 2, and specifically we're going to be talking about general game master like guidance, advice, and that sort of thing for Pathfinder 2. But specifically we want to address, and the reason I dragged him on stream is that we want to talk about when a game master decides to transition from D&D 5th edition, or perhaps another system, but that's the one we'll mostly address, over to Pathfinder 2. And what are some of the common mistakes or blunders or pitfalls that a game master might fall into? And I have a big list of my own right here that I'm going to be talking with him about to get the lowdown on it. And then obviously you all can ask your questions, and we will be answering questions that you might have about game mastery on Pathfinder 2 and transitioning from 5th edition over there. So that is the agenda for tonight. I got to do some sleazy plugs tonight before we get rolling. The first one is that we are still raising money for Stack Up. There should be a little thing up here. We have $2,000 raised so far for Stack Up. They are a military charity that helps our active and veteran service members, both at the U.S. and allied forces. They do a whole bunch of things for the military. They promote positive mental health and suicide prevention. So if you would like to help our service members, you can do so. There is a link down in the chat. There is a link in our description as well where you can donate to Stack Up. Our goal is to hit $10,000, which is displayed. I gotta figure out where to point. All of my stream setup is backwards today because when I have a guest on, I have to use all three monitors, and I'm not used to doing that, so I don't know where to point. But right here is our current progress. Goal is to get to $10,000. And as you can see at the top of the screen, every time somebody donates a certain quantity, we will do stupid things on stream. For instance, we do push-ups, we do dancing, we do singing and dancing, just lots of silly stuff for charity. And I think Mark is probably going to join us as well, right? Mark will do all the push-ups. How's that sound?
I'll just do it where you can't see whether I did it or not. You can believe in them.
That seems like a dungeon master rolling behind the screen and just making
which I never do normally, but if it's push-ups, I'll make an exception.
All right. All right. Well, maybe I'll just have to do the push-ups then if we can't be trusted. So anyway, if you'd like to donate, things down there. And then we do have a giveaway going on as well. We're giving away a hard copy of my book, Into the Fae, or you could get DM Lair store credit as well. We do give away every single live stream for folks, and we will draw the winner at the end of the giveaway as well. So if you'd like to get yourself some cool loot, you can join the giveaway. And I think the last thing that I need to do before we kick this bad boy off is give a shout out to our amazing patrons. Let me get the right screen up. There we go. Oh man, I just got really big on screen too. All right, so all these wonderful people that you can see on screen here are my wonderful patrons. They help support everything that we do around here, from these live streams We had to fly Mark into his house to get on camera with us. It was super expensive.
There we go.
Oh yeah, baby. But they foot the bill for that, so we're very happy. They help us do live streams, the videos that we make. We have 100% free content for game masters over on the dmlair.com. And obviously our patrons get our premium content as well, which is Lair Magazine, which is filled with game master resources, adventures, traps, puzzles, whole bunch of the cool stuff, monsters. And we are also now publishing it for Pathfinder 2. So you can get D&D 5e and Pathfinder 2 resources in Lair Magazine. And Mark here, helping us with 3 of the issues as well, converting them to Pathfinder 2.
I mean, that's how you pay for my flight, if you think about it. I mean, it wasn't exactly the flight, but I paid for a flight and you paid to help for the conversion help. So it's sort of, I know you were kidding, but it sort of was true at the same time.
There we go. All right, sweet. And then these folks here in red, these patrons support at an even higher level. So they get their names read off on screen. I'm going to do that right now after I get a dramatic sip of coffee because my throat is dry.
So much drama.
The anticipation is palpable. All right, here we go. Alex B, Alex S, Alexander O, Alexis S, Amanda W, Ambers, Andrew P, Angelique K, Art Soccer, Arutha, Ashley, Brandon A, Brian O, Cat, Cheduff. It's like 2 cats. One cat's not enough. You got to have 2. I have 7. Cheduff, Chad K, Christian V, Christine B, Christopher G, Clay W, Coin Slot, Colin W, Connor D, Contrary Gravy, Dan S, Daz What Up, David S, Derek W, Derek E, Doug, Duty K, Dungeon of Terra, Dutch, Ed R, Edward B, Edward L, Mfrabo, and Dorian72, Eric B, Flux Forest Brew, Gabion, Gene A, Generic Throwaway, Goliath Cleric, Gravy Chorn, Greg P, Gregory H, Guapo, GVTM, Harlan S, Heart Ungaled, Helltongue, Hinna Hanta, HLD, Iron Cascade, It's Beobon, Izzy T, Jackie Pizza, Jake L, Jacob K, James L, Jan F, Jessica J, Jim B, Jim P, J Long, Joanne P, Joe E, John A, John C, John H, John P, John the Wicked, Jonathan B, Jordan A, Joseph H, Joseph W, Josh M, Josh S, Justin N, K, Colon, Kirby, Curryclaw, Laura L, Lettermage, Leonhardt, Linda, Matlock, Magna, Molten M, Mama Dragon, Matthew C, Meepanone, Mighty Loki, Mirostal, Mitchell, Mo20s, Mr. Owl, Mr. Lincolnu, Learn with Glasses, Nearth, Old Mad Mage, Packaned Pancakes, Penguin Butt, Pethnick, Porkchop Bacon, Seiko Jam, Puppet Master, Ramus, Randy B, Rebar, Renner C, Robert J, Robin B, Russell L, Ryan, Sale R, Sakura, Sam B, Sean S, Shadow 1317, Shane L, Sheila A, Simfan, Sofa Man, Soul Naya, Stan the Man, Stephen J, Stephen G, Stephen T, Steve L. Oh, I think the first one was a Stefan. It has an F in there. Sorry, buddy. Steve L, I think it was. I don't know. Steve S. Sturm, Taxos Hokins, Taryn, Terry V, The Three Quarters Hospital, The Old DM, The New Bad Obre, Thomas F, Tim B, Timothy T, TK Travels, Tom T, Bub, Woo, Travels the Lost, Trinity Series, Tyler R, Unalloyed, Undying Warlock, Valagor, Victoria Q, Vladimir S, Walt O, Wesley K, William C, William D, Wolf's Love, XX Red Drum, Yoel R, Zachary J, Zombie Trami. All right. Thank you, wonderful patrons. Do appreciate that. All right. Ready to rock and roll. Ready to do this, man?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go over classic GM blunders.
Yes. Classic GM blunders for Pathfinder 2. So I have my list here, and let's open this up with the thing that probably got me I was like, when I get ready to do Pathfinder 2, right? I have one game that I run in Pathfinder 2, and I'm like, okay, I design my own adventures. That's just what I do. And so I almost never use adventure modules or pre-made stuff because I just enjoy designing my own crap. And so I'm like, all right, cool. I'm going to design an adventure. I'm going to design a dungeon. Awesome. All right, I'm going to get some encounters together. And I'm like, this is how you make low level, moderate, etc. difficulties. And then I'm like, all right, how many encounters am I supposed to have in my dungeon? Because in 5th edition, there is an adventuring day mechanic that literally tells me, gives me a budget of experience points, adjusted experience points, and then I build my encounters and I subtract them from my budget. Once I have filled my budget, right, then I know that I have the proper, quote unquote, number of encounters in my dungeon that my adventuring group should be able to do before they have to take a long rest. And so when I came to Pathfinder 2, I was like, all right, I need to know how many there are, and I couldn't find any, right? And so then I did a search, and literally I found people, I think it might have been on Reddit, where they're just like, there is no adventure day mechanic. And they were, I think they said that somebody at Paizo, it might have been somebody who worked there, a designer or something, said something around the lines of, you can have as many or as few as you want. And they literally just didn't want to like give you an answer type of thing. And so I was like, okay, all right, I'll just do as many or as few as I want. And so I just threw a whole bunch of encounters in the adventure, and my group TPK'd in my very first adventure. And so I was like, all right. And it wasn't just that. I think there was something else I did too that we'll talk about a little bit later. But the biggest question is like, what's up with the adventure day mechanic? And what is a game master supposed to do? Because like when I'm designing a dungeon or an adventure, like sometimes the story is such that they need to be able to do the entire adventure before they retreat and long rest or something. Because many times when I'm running my games, if the group leaves for like a day to long rest, like my dungeon isn't just going to sit there static and wait just in the same condition. The dungeon denizens are going to adjust and do things, right? And so I want to make sure that sometimes, not all the time, but many times I want to make sure my players can get it all done. So how do we do that?
So a lot of editions of D&D and D&D like games have had a so-called number of encounters for an adventuring day, none of which almost anyone really used, including published adventures, that much. And even when they did, and you did, Luke, even when they did, and I did sometimes too, I tried to use the right number of encounters when I was starting off, and it never really worked out that it was actually taking the amount of resources that were expected. So as I mentioned, when we went into this a little bit in one of the other streams in like somebody's side question, but basically those number of encounters per day are kind of like a progress bar on your computer that's there to guess things and is not actually measuring how long it's going to take, with the idea that like, oh, if it finishes early and then just shoots up to the end of the progress bar, you'll be happy. You won't stop to think, wait, why did it go from 20% to 100% in like 1 second? And so similarly, encounters per day is something that you really can't tell just based on the number of them. So in Pathfinder 2e, it doesn't try to do that. Instead, encounters are defined based on the amount of your resources they might take and a way that they might prevent you from being able to handle future encounters in the same day. And you can even see this if you go to building encounters with the literal definition of the types of encounters. So you can have trivial encounters, which are so easy, the characters have essentially no chance of losing. They don't even need to spend significant resources at all unless they're particularly wasteful. And their best is warm-ups, palate cleansers, reminders that the players are awesome. I'm just reading this out of the rules. They can still be fun to play, so don't ignore them. Players like to, kick the beans out of opponents sometimes. So a low threat encounter does present a veneer of difficulty. Low threat doesn't mean that like it's super ridiculously beyond anything easy. That's trivial. It means there is some threat. The threat is just kind of low. I might use some of the party's resources, but it would be rare or the result of very poor tactics for you to be seriously threatened or like sent on the back foot from it. That's the kind of thing where you may or may not have to rest for like 10 minutes afterwards, but you definitely are not going to have to retreat from the entire dungeon. I just read that definition off. So moderate threat encounters are a serious challenge to the characters, though unlikely to overpower them completely, though it could. Characters usually need to use sound tactics and manage their resources wisely to come out of a moderate threat encounter ready to continue on and face a harder challenge, aka a severe threat encounter, without resting. So most groups are going to have to do a 10-minute rest after a moderate encounter. And it could take a dent out of their daily resources. So the question would be, can they handle a severe afterwards? Usually they can't. But if they have really bad luck or something, really, really bad luck, maybe they can't. Most groups can. So then there's severe threat. The hardest encounters most groups of characters can consistently defeat, because the next one up, extreme threat, are like 50-50 coin tosses unless the characters go really all out. Severe encounters are most appropriate for important moments in the story, such as confronting a final boss. Bad luck, poor tactics, or a lack of resources due to the prior encounters can easily turn a severe threat encounter against the characters, and a wise group keeps the option to disengage open.
Right.
So this is how you determine how your adventuring day goes. Every moderate encounter is going to sap some of their resources. And the question is, will they be ready for the severe you put at the end? You can also mix things up and put a severe at the beginning. And then they won't have a severe at the end, but they might like drain all their resources fighting it. And then you don't know how they're going to be able to handle even the moderates afterwards. If they're like, this is legitimately hard, I can tell it's hard, and then they throw everything in there.
That's like the classic scenario of the players who are like, oh, let's be clever and figure out a way to convince the guards to take us directly to the boss at the end. Because if we kill the boss, then everything crumbles, right? And so they do that. They get into the boss. They fight the boss. Let's pretend that's your severe. They're heavily depleted, but they don't realize that the boss has lieutenants. And the lieutenants rally the rest of the dungeon, and now they have to fight their way out, and they're trapped or something, right? And so
my group did that. They went in a back door. They took out the boss, but they wound up aggroing the entire building. But fortunately, the enemies were in different rooms. Some of them were putting on armor, getting their weapons. So it came in waves a little bit, but they wound up aggroing like 12 encounters or something like that. They won because they took the boss out first, and then they actually did it quietly, but then they went into another room and aggroed everything else. Like, well, they came from where the boss was. So absolutely. So most groups can take like 2 to 3 moderate encounters and then a severe, usually. But if you do that, there is like a decent risk that the moderate encounters will deplete them. So if you want to be really sure, because like you said, if you have a plot where it's like do or die, if the characters don't do this in one day, they die or something horrible happens. So they're probably going to die trying to do it. If you want to be sure that they're going to win, then you would be more likely to throw only 1 moderate and 1 severe, because moderate says if they use really bad tactics or get very unlucky, they could run out of resources. That's unlikely. But if you need to be absolutely certain and super conservative, and this is what we said in the last video when this question came up, you could throw almost any number of low threat, not any number, because you could have absolute dice bad luck, but almost any number of low threat if you give short amount of times to rest in between, and 1 moderate threat roughly to be completely conservative. But realistically, groups can take like 2 to 3 moderates and a severe. They could probably even take 2 severe a lot of the time, but that can be, if they don't have a lot of moderates, they could be like, oh, a bunch of low and 2 severe, but that's playing with fire, because depending on your group's composition, right? Like if your group is like all wizards and witches and, those kind of characters who the only way they can power through offensively is to either burn spell slots or use their cantrips, then it's possible that you will have more trouble if you have a bunch of really hard encounters, because they could win the low threats maybe with their cantrips or focus powers, but the hard ones, they need slots, and if at low levels they'll run out.
And that's assuming that they're considering that and they're not blowing their spells, because a lot of groups are going to be like, they're going to start casting leveled spells in the first few encounters, and they're not thinking there's going to be something crazy at the end. My players probably expect it because they play with me long enough. But now,
that's why Trivial says they won't spend significant resources unless they are particularly wasteful. Right. And some groups are. I know we talked about, like, I guess, what did I call that player, Jill or something like that in the last video, who just throws her biggest spell immediately at whatever it is, even if it's like 3 orcs. Chain lightning.
It's cool. It's like, I got my spell off.
Okay. But so if you have those players, even low threat and trivial threat encounters can bleed their resources. But assuming that they're playing somewhat tactically, if you have a group that is like low level in particular and very heavy on spellcasters, they could run into trouble if you try to endurance them through multiple severes or a lot of moderates. Whereas if the group is more so based on like martial characters with some spellcasters with some renewable abilities and ability to get them out of a pinch, or if it's higher level when spellcasters have a lot more spell slots, then you're more likely to be able to handle what I was talking about before. So all that said, I still stand by the fact that if it's like the world will end or the characters will die if they don't make it through that day, you probably don't want to have more than like the 1 moderate and the 1 severe, but that's rarely the case. And for a home GM who's not like writing an adventure to be played by many people, they could just put in a few more and be like, oh gosh, that first moderate, Jill just threw all for Chain Lightnings. Maybe I won't do 3 moderates, even though I was planning on it. Maybe I'm going to weaken some of those later encounters a little bit because we're all going to die thanks to Jill always constantly Chain Lightning.
That's Jill's fault. The nature of that dungeon shouldn't change just because a
player
makes a bad decision.
It just depends on how you do it. Depends on your group's social contract. If your group's social contract is the nature of the dungeon is what it is, and we know we need to be careful with our resources, we need to retreat. It even says in the definition for severe encounters, keep your options to disengage open in Pathfinder 2. So if that's your social contract, don't change it. Have them retreat, have them learn the resources. But if your social contract is beer and pretzels and Jill just throws her Chain Lightnings, they're not really going to retreat. That is okay. That's an acceptable game, and you can probably make it work either way. You just kind of have to know your group. Right. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, and that's one reason why trying to pretend that there is leads to a lot of problems. I've seen GMs who, or even DMs in D&D, who like legitimately have like felt bad and come to me being like, I don't know what to do, but I just can never run the number of encounters that are supposed to be in adventuring days. And here's the thing, they blame themselves for problems with systems. Like even systems I like that I've worked on, like Pathfinder First Edition, where they're like, it's really my fault, it must be, but you know, the spellcasters are going out of control, nobody else can do anything. And it's because I know we're supposed to have this many encounters in the day, but they'll just do one and then go into a rope trick after they've done all the things. I can't think of a way to make them fight more than that. And the spellcasters going, I know it's just my fault. And it's like, it's actually also the system's fault. It's not your fault, GM. Yeah. But it's something they can blame themselves for because they seem to be like not following the user manual and voiding their warranty on having a fun time, if you see what I mean.
Oh, yeah. It's the system's fault. Somebody put rope trick in the game and didn't realize that players would get that and then want to use it constantly because it's the safest way to adventure, you know? So in summary, then, it sounds like what you're saying is that if I have 2 to 3, and I'm literally taking notes because I want to. This is for my own game, by the way. If I have 2 to 3 moderate encounters and 1 severe, it's going to be challenging, but they probably will be okay as long as.
I think most groups can make it if they don't have a bad matchup, really bad luck. Jill out there throwing away the Chain Lightnings. Most groups can make it most of the time. And even you can see in the comments to your other video that was the short video where we talked about ultra conservative. I want to be sure they'll make it unless something goes wrong. We said if you're that sure, keep to 1 moderate and 1 severe. And you saw in the comments people, well, no, my group can usually do 2 to 3 moderates, or if there's lower number of moderates, 2 severe. If you want to see a format that does this, and they don't have a ton of lows, although you could put in a ton of lows and trivials to make the dungeon bigger, if even a 1-day dungeon. But Pathfinder Society scenarios tend to have at most 4 combat encounters, and they do it in this way. And they want to they know they're 1 sitting. Usually you can't rest. Maybe you can rest once, and then they'll put harder encounters because it's like, oh, you climb the mountain tomorrow, so we rest here. But they are meant to fill a particular amount of hours. And
game time hours,
yes, game time hours, but also they'd be ones where the characters can't rest and they know they can't. And they are ones that rarely see TPKs based on them overloading them. They do that by keeping to a pretty small number of encounters.
And then if I had 2 to 3 moderates and then maybe 2 severe, that would
if you have 2 to 3 moderates and 2 severe, that's going to be pushing it. If you have 2, that's going to be pushing it but for some groups it won't, right? If they're very tactical, if they're very strong, but if they definitely can't rest, I wouldn't do that unless you know your group. You could do 2 severe without the moderates. Even then, there's some groups that will TPK to 1 severe at full. Just to keep in mind, especially at very low levels when things are swingy. You can I've seen a group TPK to a moderate encounter when they used very bad tactics. They were level 1 and it was a solo opponent that was just had area effects and it wiped them out. So like the moderate was a level 3 creature, and so it was 2 levels higher than them. Like for 4 people, that shouldn't be too bad, but with area effects and them bunching up for it, that was just the end of them.
Okay, so I have a question for you then.
Sure.
I am going to be running a one shot for some of my team members that work for me and a couple moderators, and I want this to be grueling meat grinder. And so this is what I have planned. All right, they're level they're level 7. All right.
Okay, so that's at least good. They're gonna have some resources that they can use.
Yeah. So there are 4 encounters. 3 of them are moderates, and then there's an extreme at the very end. At the very end. So my goal is to just beat on them, right? And then at the very end, probably when they're a little bit depleted, just go hammer time, right?
I think that's good. 3 moderates and 1 extreme.
Okay.
They're very likely to make it to the extreme and then get killed in the extreme. But you know what? That's possible to win.
Right. So it's possible. Okay, cool. Awesome.
That's possible to win. It's very unlikely. It'll depend on if they bring their A game, use consumable items, just knowing that this is it and they're going to die otherwise.
Yeah.
Bring a good matchup to the encounter. Like if the encounter is something that team is dynamic, is good to work with, a good matchup for each other where the PCs synergize with each other. I think that's winnable, but I could also, on the other side, it's kind of like how, people try to predict like a sports game or an election, and they'll be like, you know what, this is a close, and it could go the way that we don't think, but it also could be a landslide in the other direction where one sports team or one political party wins by a lot. And similarly, an extreme encounter like after 3 moderates, that could be a win for the PCs, but it could also be a landslide for the enemies. And so it should be fun to watch. To give an example of this, we had a playtest adventure that was meant to kill everyone in the playtest. It was literally so many demons that the test was, how long do people last if you just push them to the extreme? That's the only way you can stress test certain defensive options. Because if they're not supposed to die, you'll never know how strong they are. And when one of the designers ran it on a stream and skipped some of them. So he only wound up doing like 2 or 3 of the moderate or severe and then the extreme at the end. And they actually won. Although I don't think they would have won if they had to face all of them because they would have been too depleted. Yeah. But they won because it was a demon, which was weak to good damage. And they had people who could hit it for good damage. And like somebody managed to intimidate it and make it like run away or something. And then the DM, who was like the director of game design, is like, okay, we're nerfing intimidate so it doesn't make people run away from you when they're a giant demon. And we're like, okay.
So he got slammed for it. All right, cool. So I have a pretty good plan then.
Yes.
And I've told them to bring everybody should have a backup character. And I literally have 2 of my teammates, Goliath Cleric and Penguin Butt, are in the chat right now. And it sounds like they're going to make more backup characters. And I named the adventure "Bring Out the Dead." And
perfect.
They were chatting, and they were like, "Oh, that means it's going to be a bunch of undead and stuff."
Oh, they're the dead, not the monsters.
I was like, "You guys, you're interpreting "Bring Out the Dead" the wrong way." And then Zach came back. That's Goliath Cleric. He's like, "All right, I have made a healer bot who can heal like crazy amounts of healing and stuff, And so
that's good. If you have healing and mitigation, that can be a way to try to handle these things. I still predict that they will die in the extreme. They'll make it to the extreme and then die. But we'll see. We'll see if I'm wrong. See if you beat my expectations.
Yeah, we'll see. I would ask you. I have a couple other things in that extreme encounter, but if I talk about them now, I'll give. Yeah,
don't give it away. No. Zach's just gonna take all the countermeasures.
Oh no! It's gonna be nasty. So what I really want them to do is I want them to try to sweet talk their way past like the book encounters at the beginning, because that'll be lots of fun. So we'll go. All right, cool.
Should be fun. Yeah. So what other ones do you have? When we finish yours, we can go into some of mine, and we can also take some from chat. But I know the ones you had are ones that were non-hypothetical, real transitioning pitfalls. And so those are always good to get through.
Yep. Let me just hit a quick little thing here. For people who are just joining us, we are currently raising money for Stack Up. They are a military charity that helps support our active and veteran service members, both U.S. and allied forces. If you'd like to donate to them, you can do so down in the chat. Our goal is to get up to $10,000 for Stack Up, and right now we're at $2,000. So if you'd like to donate, you can do that. They have a bunch of programs that they do to help our military, but they mostly focus on mental health and suicide prevention, and they do that through Power of Gaming, basically providing our military and veterans with like gaming systems. They take them to conventions and stuff like that. They help them to get their minds off from the stresses and things that they're going through, and promote positive mental health. And they also have a 24/7 suicide prevention hotline. I mean, it's not just suicide prevention. It's like anybody that needs help about whatever they're going through can call and talk to somebody. So they have that hotline. They have local volunteer groups as well that will help anybody who needs someone to talk to, that needs some help with something as well. So they're doing lots of amazing things for our military. So if you'd like to help support them, you could do so at a link down in the chat. We also have a giveaway going on as well. You can get a copy of, you can get my cat. Okay, whoever wins the giveaway gets the cat, all right? Because he won't leave me alone today. We'll just ship him to you in a box. Or if you don't want the cat, which is understandable because he's pretty big and eats a lot, you can get a copy of Into the Fae. It's a level 1 to 5 adventure module. That was our first Kickstarter that we did. It's really cool. I think I wrote everything in it myself. I don't know that we had anybody helping with that at that point. Now we have a bunch of freelancers and full-time team members that help with their writing. But I think Into the Fae was all me. So you could win a physical copy of that. I'm just getting the shedding hair off from here. So anyway, there's my little plugs for people who are.
Isn't there like a follow-up that's kind of like out of the Fae?
Yes. So what we're planning on doing. So this is what we're doing. Now I have to talk about that. Thank you, Mark. So what we're doing is starting in 2024, I am going to start. I'm already writing adventures that get published out to our patrons. And in 2024, I'm going to be publishing. I'm going to be starting to write the what do you call it? The sequel to Into the Fae, and it's going to be called Escape from the Fae. And what I'm going to do is it's going to get published out to our patrons every month throughout 2024. And I'm also planning on starting up another game with patrons, and they will literally be running through Escape from the Fae, and we're going to live stream it and all that kind of stuff. And so in 2024, I'll be writing it and playing with patrons, and then we'll do a Kickstarter to put everything into a module that people can have as like a physical book and stuff like that. So that's the plan. That next year it'll start coming out to patrons, and then the Kickstarter will probably be in 2025, I would imagine, something like that. I don't know. Claire, he's the guy who manages a lot of our Kickstarters, so he probably has better dates and stuff. I just trust him.
Sounds good.
That. So, all right, questions. My list. Okay, surprise mechanic. Like there's no surprise mechanic in Pathfinder 2, and I think I know why. This is my guess. This is my wild guess as to why there's no surprise mechanic. Because in 5e, there's obviously a surprise mechanic. A surprise condition. Even though most game masters just have a surprise round. But when I started playing 5e or Pathfinder 2, what I noticed is that enemies tend to hit really hard, and players tend to hit really hard, and people lose hit points quickly and die quickly relative to 5th edition. And so my theory is that if there were a surprise round or a surprise mechanic, whoever got surprised would have such an advantage that the other side would just get their butts handed to them, and it would mostly be over. So that's my theory. So you tell me, why is there no surprise mechanic in Pathfinder 2?
That's true. It's even true in 5e, really. If you're using like save or lose things and the enemies don't have legendary saves to get rid of them, like if you give one group a surprise round, they're just gonna win, and they may have even won before anybody else could do anything. If you give them an extra round and then they take their first round and win initiative, and going twice in a row, that could just be it. And the other side doesn't get to act.
Right.
That not only is that pretty terrible if that's a TPK against the players, but it is not really fun against the enemies either. So in Pathfinder, the way that works is just if you rolled really badly on perception and when you were rolling it for initiative, then you'll go last, like in initiative. If you're very sneaky and you got the drop on them, you didn't have to roll perception. You rolled stealth. Although if you trip and land on a pile of pots and pans and roll a 1, you might go late in the initiative order anyway. So it sort of combines those two things, using perception and stealth to see who gets an extra round or goes first with what is the initiative order into one roll. And so that way you don't get double benefits onto the same side and then cause them to go out of control.
Right. Now, so one of the things I feel like I had a friend of mine who was telling me about a Pathfinder 2 game he was in, and all of the players came up with this plan. They basically they knew the enemies were in a room, and some of them were at the door, some of them were at a window. And on the count of 3, the plan was to break down the door and then swing in and break through the window and then get the drop on the enemies. And they had this plan and they executed the plan. And what happened though was that basically they just rolled initiative, and then some of the enemies got to go first or something, and then some of the players went last. And it felt deeply unsatisfying that they could have this awesome plan to get the drop on the enemies, but when the game mechanics came into play, it was like, meh, we got nothing. And so I was explaining to him why it kind of worked that way, right? But he's like, yeah, but it didn't feel good. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't get anything. And so what could you do to make it feel like that sort of planning and stuff gets some sort of reward?
So what you want to do for that is, so first of all, obviously in the narrative, like if the PCs are sitting in their room and a bunch of enemy ninjas come up to the doors and the windows and things like that, the PCs are going to want to be able to roll perception to see if they notice that those enemy ninjas came up to them, right? Like there is a chance in the narrative for someone to notice. So if the enemies run initiative, that means, yeah, they had you can make however many great plans you want, but when you try to pull it off, you don't roll so well on stealth or the other checks, and the other person is like godlike at perception and they notice you through all of that, then sometimes that will happen. And sometimes that shows off, oh, wow, this enemy is really prepared. Things that you could do for that. So first of all, what they already got was they got to decide the rules of engagement. They got to decide where they were. Even if they hadn't completely knocked in the door and the windows by then, they were at the door and the windows.
Right.
If it was a sniper enemy who would rather have shot them from hundreds of feet away, they managed to make it all the way up to that point before the encounter was called at the last moment before things might be noticed. So that was one advantage. A second thing is, if it's just really epic plan, you could give a hero point to the group that pulled off the plan, which can help them put the odds in their favor. They could even use it on initiative. And a third thing is that you could give an initiative penalty to the enemies if the plan put them at a substantial disadvantage. So it would be harder for them to notice because everyone was on the other side of windows and doors and they were all synchronized. They used a magic telepathy to get the countdown perfect. Then be like, well, that might be harder to notice than normal. So maybe they got an initiative penalty. Now, they still could roll natural 20. They still could go first, but that just means that isn't just like, no, everything is negated. That's just, in the narrative, that's telling people like this is a really powerful, a very vigilant enemy.
Right.
And look at this enemy this time was really badass at being able to notice the ambush. Hopefully the PCs will get to show the same thing when their ranger notices an ambush from the bad guys that was going to try to take the PCs at camp. And it's like, wow, our ranger's awesome. He acted before the ambushers did.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. The idea of it's a two-way street, right? If the enemies, if the PCs can just ambush the enemies and get a complete surprise round, let's say, well, that means bad guys can do it too, and do you really want bad guys doing that to you?
Yeah. Do you want bad guys to be able to do that without a roll or a check, like initiative to determine who's going to do it? And just like, well, the GM's like, well, I understand, Luke's friend player, that you guys kept up watch, but listen, those ninjas that I wrote in my head had a really great plan.
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
So they just succeed. It was cool. They were coming from your windows and the door at the same time. I know they couldn't roll a stealth check against your perception; it was too low. But I just gave it to them. I gave them an extra round because I thought it was cool. Like, how angry is the group going to be at that point? It's like, wait, my perception DC, which is like passive perception in 5e for 5e players, is so high. How could these guys have beaten that? I should have been able to notice. Nah, they had a good plan. So I guess I don't have a lot of sympathy for I had a good plan, therefore I should auto succeed. I like there to be a check between characters where the character's in-game proficiencies determine things, but a plan can earn you a lot from me in terms of giving the enemies penalties, giving you a bonus, letting you set the rules of engagement before it's even rolled, but eventually you have to roll. That's just sort of, that's my viewpoint on it anyway. And I guess my viewpoint matters because changing initiative from just a dexterity based check into like being based on what skill you're using to go into a fight was one of my ideas for Pathfinder 2, and that's sort of why it was my idea. So
yeah, it's cool. It's good. It's a good idea. Yeah, for sure. Well, that makes sense. And what I told my friend was like, look you could have them, they break the door down, they break the window open, and then they get to determine where they start, the starting positions. And then even give them a +2 to their initiative modifier if you want.
Bingo. See, you came up with the same thing.
Yeah, it's very simple.
Here's another thing they get, which is very important. Those player characters get their reactions before their first turn. Because the rules of reactions state you get 3 actions and 1 reaction at the beginning of your first turn. However, the GM may determine that if your characters were aware of the opponents ahead of time, that you might have a reaction even before your first turn.
Oh, okay.
So the characters would have their reactions available, but the NPC wouldn't. Now, that's cold comfort. If the NPC went first, they do get their reaction anyway. But at least it means it's not like you won't be able to use your reactions to like defend against things with your champion's reaction, or if you were raising your shield and guarding and then broke in, you could use your shield block even before your first turn. That was not something that the enemies would have by the rules in Pathfinder, other than if they went first.
Yeah.
And in that case, they got a really good roll. They deserve it in the mechanics of the world because they got lucky or very skilled or both.
Yeah. I think there's a scenario too where there's a group of players who they kick down every single door in the hopes of getting a surprise round.
Yeah, exactly. But I've seen that before. Right. Like, it was a great plan, and you're like, maybe it was a great plan the first time, but you can't just keep saying it was a great plan every time.
Well, but here's the thing, because what I told my friend is that if you just kick down a door, there's like a reaction loop in your head. I kick down the door. I need a few moments to see who's in the room, if they're good guys, if they're bad guys, where they're located, and then decide what I'm going to do. Like, I need like a few moments to figure this out, right? Like, if you can see inside the room and you know everything, then it's a little different. But if you're just going around kicking down doors, you know what I mean? You can't get a surprise round or some sort of benefit every single time, because then every single group of players out there is going to do it every single time. Why wouldn't you? You know what I mean? So, yeah.
And the game, when we're talking about giving a bonus, if you've scouted things out ahead of time, the game has that. There's an action called Scout that exists in the game. It's an exploration activity.
Yes.
And the exploration activity of scouting is where you figure out what's in there so that your whole group can get a +1 when they're rolling on initiative. And +1 can make a lot of difference. There's also an archetype for being really good at it where you give a +2 and can do it in addition to other things at the same time, called the Scout archetype. And I've had those in one of my groups before. It was very good we also like to do those ambushes. So we not only got to set where the fight was going to begin, our Scout made it so we often did better at initiative than you might expect. Now, there was one enemy that I remember she was really nasty, and she did beat us in initiative anyway. But a lot of the time, thanks to our Scout and our positioning, we still managed to get a pretty big advantage.
Yeah. All right, we had a super chat. I want to hit this. Lord God.
Let's get it.
Thank you, Lord God. He says, when balancing encounters, also adjusting for action economy, is it better to have more enemies or hit point sponges for a challenging encounter that is fun and fast-paced?
So Pathfinder 2e rules have a specific answer to this, which is that in general, encounters will be more interesting if they have a number of opponents that is roughly close to the number of PCs, at least most of the time. However, unlike many other systems where if you throw a single thing in, it's definitely just going to lose to a spell that takes it out of the fight. In Pathfinder 2, solos can actually put up a pretty decent show for themselves. And at very low levels, they can even sometimes outperform a group that doesn't know how to fight solos. And by doesn't know how to fight solos, I mean Russian Leroy Jenkins / / oh, we're dead. Is not the way to fight them. But so you absolutely can use solos. Even then, I think a solo with like a few other things to do, like side sort of mission in the fight, and maybe make the solo a little weaker, and there's some hazards, or like you need to put out a fire, or there's some other thing to use actions on, could make it more interesting than if it's just a severely difficult solo opponent that like has high armor class and saves, so your stuff doesn't work against it very often. It crits you a lot. It's still a balanced fight because it crits you a lot and your stuff doesn't work very awesome, but it can be more fun if there's more things to do and your stuff works more often. So I recommend going with what the game says to do and sticking to around the same number of opponents as PCs as an average encounter and mixing it up every once in a while.
Yeah, awesome. All right, let's see. Let's do some questions from folks in chat.
Sure.
We have, what are some sneaky ways to encourage players to use other actions or even some obvious ways? So for instance, instead of just running in 5th edition, we don't have options. 5th edition, it's like you go in, you swing your weapon, that's it. You shoot your arrow, that's it. You cast your cantrip or maybe a leveled spell, that's it. There's like grappling and shoving.
You have to find a bonus action. And if you can.
Yeah, so 5th edition is pretty, like when I'm a player in 5th edition, I'm just like, wow, this is riveting, man. I'm doing the same thing every round. So in Pathfinder 2, what other options are there that players or monsters can do to make things more interesting than just stand there and swing?
So it sounded like the question first is what can a GM do to trick the players into doing that?
That's true.
So it's good because I was going to say one of the pitfalls I wanted to bring up was a GM as well as a player pitfall of standing there and swing. Easy pitfall to make if you are coming from something like 5th edition D&D is to run your monsters and just have them rush up and just swing all the time. Some monsters are built to do that, but almost no PCs are. The exception is like an archery flurry ranger can probably stand in one spot and just fire their bow every time because they're very specifically are built as their entire thing is they hunt their target and then they reduce the penalty for making lots of attacks. So it's one build of one class. But other than that, you're going to want to mix things up. So I think that one way you can trick your players or at least convince them is just like, especially if they're new and it's okay, it feels okay to do a little bit of a tutorial, have a fight with them where, they've attacked once and then they attack the second time and they're about to attack the third time. Right. And they're like, I want to strike again. And you can say to them before they do it, it's like, okay, so, that's at a minus
10 or
it's a minus 10 or maybe a minus 8 with the right weapon. It says, so what's your total modifier for that? Let's say they're a first level barbarian and their total modifier would then be probably 7. So they're like, well, it's 7. Okay. So you're at a net -3. So I want you to know that opponent you're facing has an armor class of 16. I'm just going to tell you, it does. So you're only going to hit on a 19. 20 is a critical hit.
Right.
So if you, now, if there's a dire situation and you really need that crit to end the fight, or this is one and done, that's not an action that is never worth it. But consider whether you have something in your kit that you can use instead of that, because there's a 90% chance that if you do that, nothing's going to happen. You can just be frank with them and tell them that. Let them know. If they're trying to roll, I usually don't just specifically tell all the numbers to my players. They figure it out anyway when they see that, oh, well, a 16 hit and a 15 didn't, so it's 16. But in this particular case, with new players who are struggling not to use strike, be frank with them about the accuracy of the third one. The second one is usually a pretty okay move unless you're against a boss. And ask them, like, what else do you have on your sheet that's not an attack? So not like grapple or trip or one of those, because that would take some of the same penalties. But what do you have here? And then they might be like, well, I don't know. I guess I have intimidation. You're like, okay, well, you could demoralize it. In fact, if you'd done that first, they would have gotten a penalty against all of your attacks.
Yeah. And I think one of the pitfalls, it seems to me, like somebody in chat was even saying that 5th edition has other things you can do. And I'm like, yeah, but they all take actions and I only get 1 action. And the thing with Pathfinder 2 that I like is you got 3 actions. So you can attack a couple times plus do something else that's meaningful, instead of just sitting there and attacking. Whereas in 5th edition, you can do one or the other, And so I think that versatility is something that coming from 5th edition, we're not used to. And so in 5th edition, if you're not depleting the enemy's hit points in a meaningful way, you could be in trouble, right? Unless you're doing something that's very, very strategic or tactful and that's going to make a big difference, but basically not depleting hit points, skipping around, even to drink a healing potion. If you're using the standard rules in 5th edition where you drinking a healing potion is an action, like that's a death spiral because the enemies usually are doing more damage to you per round than drinking a healing potion is going to heal. And so if you're drinking a healing potion, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Healing is also a lot weaker in 5e comparative to what's happening than in Pathfinder. So healing is usually a good action. Even the 2-action heals are like a 2-action heal spell heals a ton of health.
Yeah.
It's probably more powerful than what the enemy did to you in a round, unless it's like a solo boss or something like that.
Yeah.
So, or they got lucky with a crit. But like at first level, a heal spell can heal you on average with 2 actions for 12.5 damage. That is, if you're like a wizard, that's probably like almost all of your hit points at first level.
Yeah.
Sure, if you're the fighter, that it's still like half of all of your health. That's yes, it took your cleric buddy's entire turn, but chances are, if you're the fighter, it may have taken the enemies, multiple enemies, to get that much damage stacked up on you. Because if you look at like the damage that like some of those monsters are going to deal in one hit, it's like maybe 4 or 5, right? So they had to hit you twice. So unless they got lucky and hit you with a -5, that probably was like multiple enemies, and your one cleric took it down. So healing is more valuable. Debuffing the enemies is valuable. If they just don't think that giving a -1 or a -2 to the enemy is valuable, there are ways to do it. If you play on Foundry, there's a module people have that like highlights whenever the +1 mattered, because it's a lot of times. You can try to convince them with math, but most people won't be convinced by that, so I don't recommend it. But if you happen to have someone you know will be convinced by math, then show them how lowering the enemy's AC could increase both their chance to hit and their chance to crit for all of their allies. And then they might be like, increases chance to hit and crit. So it's actually sort of a double value in that way, because it does about twice as much as what you would think. You can show them that it's somebody who hits on a 10 on the die, 10 on the d20, don't worry about any of the modifiers or the target number. If you give them a +1 to hit, they increase their damage by about like 1 in 6. So like if the damage was 30, it goes up by 5 expected just from a +1, and each +1 puts it up by another 5. So it'd be like, hey, maybe you should move to get a flank. You realize that if you do, that increases the damage of expected on your hit, on your first hit from the 30 damage used to be that you expected to get like 18, and now you expect to get like 23 from it. So that's a lot more. And I'm not sure if that's exactly right. No, it should be the +2 should be 6 more. So you expect to get 24 instead of 18. So, and then your second hit, which you would have needed a 15 to hit, is now going to hit on a 13. So that one is going to go from that one's going to go up too by a significant amount. So in total, they go up by a lot, and making that third attack is worth way less than the amount that you buff both of the 2 attacks, and your ally who is now flanking and gets the bonuses too, or the penalty on the enemy. So if you have like the exact one player in the world who will be convinced by math instead of like experiencing and feeling it and like what they think seems cool for them to do, then you could use the math, because the math is very clear to people in the minority. Like me, I'm someone who could be convinced by math, but there aren't many of us. So I would say know your players, know what makes them tick, and know what they care about. A lot of players care about glory. It's why in even just like, like MOBA games, people want to play the carry who does a big hit and gets like the kill streak, not the support. I mean, I play the support, but most people want to play the carry. And so if you do use something like that module in Foundry that highlights, which like this critical brought to you by the bards, inspire courage, and it always tells. You can try to do something like that in real life, which I tend to do as well. When somebody exactly gets it, it's like, well, that is exactly a hit. So good thing you demoralize them. If you call that out, it gives a little bit of the glory to the person who wasn't just doing the damage, because damage is always going to give the glory, because you shout out a big number, they get a kill, and then they're like, you dropped it. That person's going to feel great. So try to make a way to make people feel good for the other actions that they take. Also, if you've put in like I suggested, even into solo encounters, you can put in side goals during the encounter, and those might not even use attack skills. So it might be like, okay, I'm gonna shoot my bow, and then I'm gonna like fix this ceiling that's collapsing on us so that falling rocks stop falling down on our characters. That can give you a feeling of accomplishment when the falling rocks stop falling on the characters. Or in the playtest, I think there was one that had falling rocks and there was a swarm of bats, but they really didn't mean any harm, but they were very startled by the fight. And so someone could use nature to calm them down and have them stop like causing a problem. So like the person who calms the bats and the person who fixes the ceiling both feel good, in addition to the person who like beats out the main boss enemy.
Yeah, that's cool. That brings up another question we had here that's very related to that, I think. What's your opinion on the idea that Pathfinder is just an illusion of choice? The idea that there's lots of options, but you have to choose certain options or you're screwed. Like the idea that you have to have a healer spec PC.
Okay, so to an extent, an argument could be made that that any game is an illusion of choice, and that life is an illusion of choice, and some kind of weird like existentialist thing. But if we're going to say, okay, sure, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that very disingenuous video that went up by Taking 20, where he got a bunch of rules wrong from Pathfinder 2nd edition, tried to do things that didn't make any sense, and then also said they were optimized, like attacking 3 times with characters. Then I would say that argument doesn't make any sense, because 5e more so, much more so. But they both you could build a character who you have intentionally built that character to be really good at a particular combination of things. And in the ideal White Room world, you will use that on most turns. That can happen in almost every game that's D&D like they've ever played. If you tried to build that character, you pick your class, you're like, I want to find a class that doesn't make me think hard, it doesn't make me rotate my moves, that just lets me repeat my moves. And you can find that. In fact, a Flurry Ranger, which I think a Ranger was even the example he used in his video, is like the only build in Pathfinder 2 that could make lots of repeated attacks and not care about it as much. However, I would say that Pathfinder 2 is more likely to force you to mix up your options because of the way that 3-action economy works, changing the value of things. And if you don't realize that that's true, you are probably not playing the game as optimally as you think when you say that you found an optimal thing that you always should use. For example, striding away from an enemy is remarkably useful a very large number of times. Not always. Sometimes it's actually completely useless, or it's even a waste of your turn, and you're going to have to waste time later on. But sometimes it can actually give you a large advantage, especially if you're up against a scary opponent, like a big boss that might be able to hit you with their later attacks. And so I would say that if you're not thinking about the way you could use situational strategies and the weaknesses of the enemy to do things differently, you're definitely not playing the game as optimally as you could be. You can find a local maximum that might appear to be, oh, this is good because it's like locally better than anything that's slightly different from it. There's probably something very different you could have been doing though. So like, for example, I said before, if you're up against a boss, the wrong thing to do is have everybody run into the boss and start whacking it with their swords, especially a big melee boss, right? All you're doing is giving it free attacks, and its attacks are better than yours. Even its -10 attack might hit you because it's a solo boss.
How are you giving it free attacks by rushing in and beating on it?
Because it didn't have to spend any actions to move up to you.
Okay.
You're giving it free attacks and taking away actions of your own if you just Leroy Jenkins up and just smack it as many times as you can.
So maybe keep your distance and pink at it to make it waste this move getting up to you or something. And
imagine instead that you did that you made it come to you, and then the fighter, let's say it's one of those big like hulking brutes. It's got pretty good armor class, but not the highest. But pretty good. Amazing fortitude, and its reflex is low because it's a big hulking brute. So you trip it, going up against its weak reflex with your first attack. Now you did give away that big damaging hit that was your first attack. But it's now on the ground. then you back away.
Mm.
Right? Its next turn, it has to stand up,
right,
then move to you. It only has one action left.
Right.
If it has a big 2-action power swing, it can't use that.
Right.
If now its one action could easily still crit you, but the thing is, with a boss, its second action might be able to crit you with a -5.
Right.
Not likely, but it could, and it's probably going to hit with that -5. So you got rid of several of the boss's good actions. Meanwhile, okay, so your fighter didn't do that much because you tripped. Maybe once it was on the ground and it was flat-footed, you hit at a -5. See if you hit, see if you don't, and then you backed away.
Right.
So you might have missed because you hit at the -5. Let's say you did. So you didn't do any damage. But now all 3 of your other party members were wailing on it, and you used up 2/3 of the enemy's turn.
Yeah.
So, and that's only something that was a good move because we specifically were fighting a singleton enemy. There was a big hulking thing with low reflex.
Right.
So that's not the thing you would do every time either.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is if you can't come up with combos with your allies or situational ways to use the environment and your opponent's weaknesses against you, then maybe you found something that's okay, but you may have found something like Cody was saying he found an optimal set. And it was always the best, so therefore it was an illusion of choice. And also that his group TPK'd all the time. And that they couldn't win. And it's like, I think that most of what he said was accurate for his group, except for that they weren't as optimal as he thought, because most people think that most people think they're great at the game that they at all the games that they play, and they aren't always.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're TPKing all the time, how is what you're doing optimal? It's just kind of like, ooh, what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, he might have thought, well, it was the best possible thing. The game is just so hard that it's impossible, I guess. But that was like the group was obviously not doing the things that were the most optimal. And that you could tell that by the fact that they were always repeating the exact same routine, because the game is designed specifically to get around this problem, which actually other editions have had. Pathfinder First or 3.5. 5e to an extent too, but it's not even as bad as in Pathfinder First. You could make a character who literally, I made a character whose enchantment spells were so difficult to resist that if they were not immune to enchantments, I win when I get my turn.
Right.
Or they could roll a natural 20.
And I've heard
Except
similar
they had
stories.
to roll twice.
I've had people telling me about like a grapple build, for instance, they can make in Pathfinder 1, and like it's auto grapple, and then the enemy is done. You're done. Game over.
That's correct. It's grapple and it ignores freedom. I know the one they're talking about. It ignores freedom of movement. Which was like the one way to stop grapples. And it prevents dimensional travel out of the grapple in case they were trying to, dimension door away. And you just win.
You've won the game.
And yes, in that one, there is no choice.
Let's just pack up our dice. You guys have figured it out. You've won. I can no longer challenge you.
It's basically rock, paper, scissors. You can challenge them by finding something that like can't be grappled, not from freedom of movement, or in my case of mine, a mindless creature. Although there were a lot of ways to get around immunities in Pathfinder 1, so I had a bunch of like this. I had like 3 or 4 ways to defeat creatures that were immune to enchantments, even though they were immune with my enchantments. But the point is, Pathfinder 2 is one of the lowest in terms of that, because it's the optimal play is to use your situation, your allies, teamwork, and all those other things to your advantage with the 3-action economy, which will segue directly into one of the questions you told me ahead of the stream, which is why can't you just split up your movement whenever you want in the middle of your turn?
that was so like this. One of my friends was telling me, look it, there was this window, all right? We had broken the glass of the window, and we're outside the window.
Is this the same situation?
Yes. And so, I had to move up to the window, one action. I had to climb through the window, another action. And the enemy was 5 or 10 feet in, and I had to move up to them. So, all I could do on my turn was go through the window. And they're like, this sucks, man. Why can't I just use the one movement of 30 feet to go boop, 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 and then attack at least once or twice, right? And so, splitting up movement.
Okay, so to be clear, a couple things on this example. One, given that they had this whole plan that they were breaking through the windows, I don't see why the GM didn't let them be right up on the window to start the encounter.
Or inside. We just broke
through. Maybe
right.
just outside, because they just are smashing it as the initiative is rolled or something like that. But either way, I think the GM may have been a little uncharitable about their starting position. But
uncharitable.
You know what?
I like that word, uncharitable. That's a good way to say that.
You know what, though? I don't think that's a problem with the GM. I can see how there might have been reasons that they did that, okay? So secondly, Pathfinder 2 does say that if you're doing a series of different types of moves, Not like a move with an attack in it, but a different types of moves. The GM might want to allow them to be combined in such a way that, like, you know, you have to like do a hop at some point during your stride, and then you might allow that to work together. There is a rule in the book that says GM's discretion, you can allow this.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with allowing it in certain situations where you're doing like some movement in the middle of another movement. Okay, but the reason why you can't just split your movement whenever you want is so that movement matters. Because if you can split your movement whenever you want, then you can actually just completely abstract away movement down into one of two situations. Situation one, your movement is like not higher than your opponent's. So at this point, no matter what or how you move, they just move up to you. Now, if everybody's got attacks of opportunity or other reactions or things like that, they may be flying off. So movement sort of matters in the fact that you're all triggering lots of attacks of opportunity from each other, but it otherwise doesn't, because it's not like they used anything to get to you and you didn't use anything to get away. You just used your split movement. The other situation is you are faster than them, whether it's because you tripped them in 5e and they have their movement, or you just naturally have such fast movement that you're already like doubled their speed, and you could move in, hit them with all your attacks, then move out, and then they can't move without dashing. Or sorry, is dash the name of that action in 5e? I always forget the action names. The one where you spend your main action to get more movement.
Correct.
So in 5e, it's kind of binary. It's either it doesn't do anything other than you guys opportunity attacking each other, or they lose their entire turn. And there's nothing in between. And usually they won't lose their entire turn, because you kind of, to get that in a steady state to happen every time, you have to kind of be like twice as fast as them, or at least faster than by a bit, and they're very foolish. And they're like, well, I'll just move very close to you. And you're like, okay, great. Then I'll just hit you and then run all the way away.
That's something that I've noticed that makes running Theater of the Mind really easy for 5e, because movement doesn't matter. Like, your positioning doesn't matter. If you're in melee range, you're in melee range. If you're outside of melee range, you're at ranged. So it makes Theater of the Mind really easy. But if you're trying to run a tactical game with miniatures on a map, you know, like, having movement matter is more meaningful, and you could actually apply strategy, tactics, and stuff, you know, as opposed to just, like, if I can run up to this guy, knock him out, you know, and then go to the next guy and knock him again, and then go to the next guy and knock him again, or whatever, you know what I mean? Then the movement, like you said, it doesn't mean anything, you know?
Correct.
Yeah.
And look, I get it. I run Theater of the Mind in Pathfinder 2e. It's not the easiest. I run in Pathfinder 1, where it really mattered for like weird positioning abilities, and a lot of ranges on things were very different from each other. And it's not easy. It works because my group is very good at mental math and geometry, but like I've got like 3 MIT physics PhDs in my group. Most groups don't have so many physics PhDs. I'm not one of the physics PhDs. I am a computer science master's only. So the point is that you don't need to be able to run in Theater of the Mind and keep all of the positioning unless you really care about it. You can do VTT, you can do it with miniatures, but exactly like you said, the idea is to make the movement matter, to make the movement and where you're positioned on the map interesting, and make a move to make that interesting. First of all, not that many things actually have reactions that will punish you every time you move, but you can get it on your character and punish the enemies, which can be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And second of all, is that even if your movement isn't twice as high as theirs, you can still do something really interesting, like I just mentioned, with tripping the boss and then moving back and use up a lot of its turn.
Yeah.
And there's advanced versions of that too that you could do. Like, if the fighter trips and then moves back, the wizard could cast like slow on that enemy.
Yeah.
And if they fail the save, they lose 1 action per turn for the next 10 turns.
Right.
If they make the save, they lose 1 action per turn on their next turn.
Yeah.
So let's say they made it, because they're a boss, they probably make it.
Right.
They have really high fortitude. They may actually critically make it. That's a problem. But if they make it, then that means they lose 1 action, they stand up, if they're smart, maybe they won't move to you and they'll do what I just said that the player should do, which is not move up to their enemies and give them away free turns.
Yeah.
But if they're just a beast or something like that, they probably move up to you anyway.
Right.
And then they just wasted their entire turn and got nothing out of it. So yeah, absolutely. It's to make movement actually really meaningful. And the way that to do that is basically not letting you split up for free. Now, there are some special activities that are like you dart in and you attack and then you move out and you move a total distance of your speed. You can get those if you take the right feats. They're strong. They're really good.
Yeah.
I recommend them if you want to try to do this kind of skirmishing tactic, especially if you can get a very, very fast speed.
Yeah.
Heck, I'm writing a couple of classes, the Elemental Avatar and the Eldamon Trainer class, that use new elemental powers that are based around these like Eldamon, which are like, you know, kind of Pokemon-ish, but the cold element gives movement penalties to your enemies. You can bet that if you mix that up with somebody who had the ability to dart in, hit, and then move out, you could cause fits on the enemy when their movement speed is like reduced by 30.
Right.
And it's like, well, how am I going to get up to you?
And I think this in a way boils down to the idea that 5th edition is more of a superhero style game where you can kind of do anything, or you could do lots of amazing, awesome stuff. Whereas in Pathfinder 2, it's a little bit grittier, more realistic. And if you want to do those awesome things, you got to find the feats to do it. You have to seek out builds or different things, you know, to be able to do it. You can't just automatically do a lot of these things that I think coming from 5th edition, we might just take for granted, you know.
This is one of my favorite topics to watch, as like anybody can pick any side for this. Gritty versus superhero.
Yeah.
So you could make that argument and it's pretty solid. I can make the argument that Pathfinder 2 is the one that has the superhero narrative feeling, and that 5e is the one that has the grittier feeling in general, even though maybe its rules are not actually balanced with which encounters are deadly or not, but how it's supposed to be balanced. Here's my argument for that, which is let's say you're playing in a grittier setting, like I don't know, one that can go pretty epic, but that at least for like sword fighting tries to is a little more realistic with things, where I literally saw like one of the best swordsmen in the world be like, these 8 brigands are trained soldiers who have deserted an army. They know what they're doing. They're not the greatest, but there's 8 of them. They have me in every position. I think I can win, but there's a good risk I'm going to be heavily injured or even killed from this fight. That was actually in the Wheel of Time novella prequel. And one of the best sword fighters says that he wins. He doesn't get that injured, but he is worried about that. And 5e can deliver that experience, that gritty experience of, oh, there's a lot of them, even though they're very weak.
Yeah, that's true.
It's theoretically a threat better than Pathfinder 2e.
Yeah, that's true,
Pathfinder
because
2e,
of the bounded accuracy. Yeah,
correct. Bounded accuracy does that. Pathfinder, it's grittier in a sense. Pathfinder 2e is less gritty in the sense that if your character is level 20, and you wanted to take on 1,000 soldiers, those 1,000 soldiers are dead.
Because they can't hit you. It's literally impossible, probably.
You are like, maybe they could form a troop creature and attack you and have like a 5% chance of doing some damage to you or something silly like that.
Yeah.
Because they form like 30 soldier troops instead of 1,000 soldiers.
Okay.
But you can actually get very super heroic, and Pathfinder 2 is not afraid to let marshals get an ability that's just like, jump 60 feet straight up. That's fine. You could even get that at like level 7 if you have the right feats for that. And so in certain ways, Pathfinder 2 is more willing to let you do like something like Cahulin or Hercules or Beowulf can do, and really take on a massive number of things that are weaker than you and feel like a superhero. But you are also right in that Pathfinder 2 is more tactical, but it doesn't have to be. By which I mean, you could, we mentioned this in chat. Someone was saying, well, I just throw nothing ever higher than a moderate to my group. And I said, you could throw nothing higher than a low at your group if you want. Yeah. If your group is not in it for the tactics, if you want to be able to do the Cody's so-called optimal illusion of choice thing and win every time by just attack, You can win if your group only fights against low threat encounters, and that's a perfectly valid gameplay style. You'll probably give a lot of story awards for like advancing the plot, and maybe you're doing politics or starting a store or some other thing that you're doing in addition to the easier combats.
Store. Yeah.
You could be starting your own store and you're getting the materials for it by killing these monsters. I don't know. I'm just making this up. You could be running a political shadow board to put your faction onto the throne. And the fights are generally easy because you're just taking out like supporters for another political faction. And I'm just making this up. The point is that it allows you to have a very tactical and, in my opinion, satisfying combats. But it does mean that you have to intentionally go out there and do easier fights if you want to kind of have the gameplay style of just like, it's late on a Friday, our brains are all fried. We don't want to think about what we're doing. We just want to just move in and just do all our attacks and have the monsters be dead.
Yeah.
We don't want to need to use tactics. We just want to auto attack. Kind of like when you're playing a Final Fantasy and the random monsters come up. And you're like, I'd like to just hit fight on everybody and just hit auto battle and get to the end of this. Yeah. Like in 5e, you probably could win with auto battle on a lot of the fights, but in PF2 you can't. That's not always a good thing. I've seen video games that got bad reviews from some people that were like, this is a really tactical, cool game. Even the random battles, I had to like think about what I was doing in each one. But ultimately, over time, that got to be too much for me because there were a lot of random battles and I had to think about what I was doing in each one. So, like, it's not, I'm not trying to say it's a universally good thing that it lets you use more tactics and think a lot about it, but it is a thing about it.
That reminds me, I'm playing through like the old like gold box collector edition for the very early D&D stuff, you know, when they were just coming out, like Kryn and stuff like that, and like you're going through these places and you get all these random encounters and I gotta fight goblins again, I gotta fight orcs again, and it's like I just want to get back to town so I can sell my loot because I can't carry anymore. It's like a random encounter. Now experientially in Pathfinder 2, I think the reason that I draw the comparison between superhero and gritty is that what we find is that monsters have higher armor class, are a little bit harder to hit, and they hit harder. And so players are not as successful hitting the monsters all the time, and they're also taking a lot of damage, right? And so it feels more like, wow, we're getting our butts kicked. These monsters are a lot harder and stuff, you know what I mean? And so I think that's why I draw that conclusion. And, you know, 5th edition, once you get to like level 5 and above, it's like impossible to die. And I
no, absolutely. Yeah. If you go with what actually happened in the system, just like 5e is easier than it wants to be with certain encounters, and to the point where, yes, okay, so bounded accuracy is a grittier idea for a system,
right? But
it still isn't gritty just because there are exploitative builds and other combinations that make it so that you are just going to win.
Right. So I guess the distinction I'm drawing is that in theory, right, like what you're saying makes total sense. What I've experienced experientially is not that. It's a little different, you know. I guess that's what I'm saying.
You're absolutely right. That's why I like this conversation.
Yeah.
It's interesting because in theory, bounded accuracy is grittier, but because of the fact that there's like out of control combos and other things like that that really make it so that the encounter building guide doesn't give you an encounter that's actually deadly, especially starting at level 5, it makes it feel less gritty, and it makes everything kind of feel like One Punch Man, even not a regular superhero, just like you're going through and the GM builds up this whole episode and then you just kill it immediately.
Yeah.
Unless it has legendary saves, and then you kill it a little bit later.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, what I want to talk about, we were talking about movement, and I want to talk about the idea of disengaging and retreating, because that's something in 5th edition, if you try to retreat and you follow the rules, you're dead. Like either side, you usually die. So I want to talk about that, but let's take a quick little break first to go bio and stuff, and then we're going to come back and we're going to hit that.
Hi, Barbarian here. Are you enjoying this content? Would you like to have me guilt trip you really quick? Because here's the thing. My team and I work really hard to create all this content. The videos, the stupid shorts, the TikTok garbage, these Q&A live streams, the adventure creation live streams, all of this stuff. All of the free Dungeon Master resources on the DMLair.com and Lair magazine, which is just amazing and beautiful. Anyway, here's the problem. My team doesn't work for free, and Mrs. Barbarian always wants me to take her out to eat, like every single day almost. And I mean, I like Olive Garden and Texas Roadhouse, but all of those margaritas get really expensive. And you know, if I don't pay the people on my team, they just kind of stop working. I don't get it. Anyway, here's how you can help me help you. Basically, you can just take a whole bunch of cash, you know, put it into an envelope and mail it. No, wait, hold on. Let me think about that. No, you know what? This is the 21st century. Just give me your credit card number. Okay, forget all of that. My lawyers have advised me to instead request that you become DM Lair patrons at the link below. I mean, it still allows you to send me money, but it's legal and you get cool stuff in return. For instance, every month you'll get a new issue of Lair magazine, which contains tons of Dungeon Master resources like adventures, puzzles, traps, monsters, magic items, and more. You see, I'm not just asking for a handout, which is what a lot of people do with their Patreons. I'm actually going to give you stuff in return. So yeah, just, you know, kind of click that link below and become a DM Lair patron, you know, so I can stop putting my foot in my mouth. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So what the Barbarian was blathering about was Lair magazine. That's the product that my team and I put out for our patrons. We actually started, so it's traditionally, we started doing it for 5th edition D&D. It has adventures, traps, puzzles, a whole bunch of cool stuff in it. But now we're also publishing it for Pathfinder 2. So whichever game you're playing, you can get adventures and other game master resources that you can literally drag and drop into your game. So the whole idea is to try to reduce prep time and still run amazing games. So if you're interested in that, there's a link down in the description and stuff. So there's my shameless plug. All right, now.
There we go.
Retreating. So what happens in 5th edition D&D is if you're engaging with the enemies, let's say the battle is going poorly for the characters, right? The PCs. And they're like, we got to get out of dodge. So what they got to do is they disengage as an action and they move away. Great. Guess what the enemy does? Moves up to them and hits them again. So then they disengage and they move away. Enemy runs up and hits them again. You're screwed. Unless you provoke from them, right? And then they'll get a free swing at you and you start running away. But at that even in that case, they're going to keep pace with you because most people can move like 30 feet around. So it's like you can't get away. Like you can't run away at all. So in 5th edition, it's you basically go toe to toe, unless the game master has a different, like if you use a skill challenge system when people want to run away or something, or you do something narratively, you know. So
that's right. That is a big issue. A lot of monsters, especially dragons, traditionally have very fast speeds.
Yes,
that's still true in Pathfinder. If you don't come up with a plan for retreat ahead of time, just part of why it says in severe, try to find an option to help you retreat. It's actually going to be pretty rough. And there aren't that many easy get out of jail free cards either. There are some. Like if you get to level 9 and the wizard is okay with everybody else dying, they can go a mile away with a 5th level dimension door by themselves.
Yeah.
And then recruit a new party. The one they like better. They just don't have to tell anyone about the last one. It's like, guys, I've never adventured before, although I kind of want to go to see if there's cool loot for 3 different dead adventurers in the dragon cave over to the east. No reason exactly, but I'd like to recruit my first ever party. It's like, weren't you that wizard who recruited 4 previous parties here? No,
like, dude, that half of the fun of the TPK is like when the new group goes back to the same place and loots the bodies, you know. So you can try to come up with a plan ahead of time for escaping. There's also a defined subsystem for chases in Pathfinder 2 that is kind of like, it's recommended you might want to do that instead of just counting who has the higher speed and saying you lose if you don't have the higher speed, or turning it into like one check where it's like, okay, everybody roll one like athletics check to, or maybe one stealth check to see if you sneak out of them, because that can make it kind of all or nothing. So you could turn things into a chase scene where the PCs are trying to escape and there's obstacles in their way. And the way chase scenes work is you collect chase points by having each person tries to contribute to the current obstacle. If they refuse or critically fail, they give a minus chase point. If they if they try and fail, they give nothing. And if they succeed, they give 1. And if they critically succeed, they do their work and somebody else's. Once you've done enough work for each character, you move to the next thing.
But if you take too long to go through, something could happen. In the case where you're chased by enemies, maybe the enemy like gets a free attack on somebody, and you take some damage. And so you can have this chase where they're taking damage as they try to make it through a certain number of chase cards, which represent obstacles and physical features they're moving through. Once they've made it through a few of them, and you're like, okay, this is the cavern mouth. At this point, you're out, and it doesn't want to chase you that far past the cavern mouth, so you made it.
Yeah.
So you could run using the chase rules.
And those are the game mastery guide, right? Because I think I saw those the other day when I was looking.
They are in the game mastery guide.
Yeah.
You need to be careful with those chase rules to use. Remember to, like they say, use the low or very low DCs for one of the skills in each set, because ideally one of the skills is so low that your character who's really good at it has a good chance to crit at it, and that way they can help pull along the person who doesn't know what they're doing.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely, you can have a chase, and the bad thing can be that if the enemy catches up, they get a free hit. And I've seen a chase like this before where Tyrannosaurus was chasing a group that was way too low level to fight the Tyrannosaurus. But they had a little bit of time because the Tyrannosaurus attacked the bad guys first, because they thought they were going to fight the bad guys, and suddenly a T-Rex came in and started eating the bad guys, and then you run away.
Yeah.
And so if the T-Rex catches up, it starts munching on you and dealing some damage each time that you fail to escape fast enough, and then you have to try to get out of there. So you can easily turn it into that as well if you like. But it is true that if you're like, nope, we're not going to do any of that, we're just sticking on the grid, and this dragon has a 200-foot fly speed, and it just keeps flying after you, and you're all dead, then so that's just sort of, that could happen too. It depends on your group.
Yeah. So I remember once we tried to use the chase mechanics in 5th edition, and I think that was the only time we tried. We were like, yeah, we're not going to do that again. So I need to try out the ones for Pathfinder 2. I actually have a chase scene coming up for one of my groups in PF2, and I'm not using those mechanics specifically. I set something else up. But that's it. I'll have to check those out because it could be cool.
Yeah, check them out, because the whole victory point system for PF2, they're very parallel to each other. So once your group learns one of them, they all start making sense, because the way they all kind of work mostly is if you're building up points to reach a goal, a critical success is 2, a success is 1, a failure is 0, and not trying or critical failure is a -1. And then sometimes you can have one where you're losing points because like your egg that is cracking, the baby dragon egg you're trying to carry is cracking as you lose the points of its hit points or integrity. And then it goes like, -2 or -1 or like 0 if they successfully keep it from cracking. And that's just sort of how a lot of them work. And you can do chases that way. You can do influencing people like at a party to change their political outlook, and infiltrations where you're doing a heist, all sorts of things with that. So I recommend it. Just remember that if you want the party to succeed at it, it does say pretty clearly that you want to have at least one of the things you can try that's pretty low and easy, so that someone in your group is going to be real great at it and make up for whoever's not good at those options. And then maybe on the next obstacle, that one who is bad at that one is going to be good now, because, suddenly instead of athletics to climb over the log, there's a mystic inscription with runes that you have to get through, and the wizard suddenly becomes the one who is carrying it, rather than the one who is being literally picked up over the log by the barbarian who got a critical success on athletics.
Yeah, it's gonna take me like years to like really start to like delve into some of these specifics and feel comfortable doing them, because right now when I'm running the game, I'm still kind of like half lost, where I'm just kind of like, well, we're gonna run the game, but I'm kind of winging some of this stuff, like that's okay. Yeah, we had this
flip to that page of the core rulebook about winging. Do you know which page that's on, where it's like
no.
So it's in a sidebar or something.
Okay.
I can't remember the page. Try to find it and just stay on that, because it's got everything you need. It just has rules like, hey, you don't know what you're doing. They want to do something. Think about whether you'd be okay with them just doing it 3 times in the same turn. If so, just make it an action. Maybe it requires a type of check to succeed if it's not something you think they can automatically do. If it's something you feel like they shouldn't be able to do that many times, make it take 2 actions.
Right.
And it has little rules of thumb like that.
That's good.
For just like for how to wing. And we made the framework of the game solid enough that winging actually works very successfully if you take those things into account. Because it's solid and made to be wings in a certain way. It won't fall apart. It won't cause everything to be way too easy or something like that.
Yeah, I think the biggest way that I've had to wing things so far, usually in combat, it's not that hard because combat rules are pretty like it's combat, right? But the biggest time I wing is when you're doing social interactions and you're intimidating or you're conversing with somebody or you're trying to persuade an enemy or you just found this book in a weird language and you're trying to like interpret or something. And then I'll just be like, okay, that sounds like an intelligence check. So we'll just, maybe it's Arcana. Okay, let's do an Arcana check, Or I'll be like, well, that's a persuasion check. Oh crap, that doesn't exist in Pathfinder 2. Diplomacy? Let's do diplomacy. Oh, here's a question for you. Animal handling. What do I use in Pathfinder 2 for animal handling? It's just nature.
Yes, it's one of the direct actions of nature, handle an animal.
Is it? Oh, it's literally in there. Okay.
It's literally, it's not just like I'm saying, oh yeah, in 5e, a lot of the skills were kind of like, well, we're not sure exactly what's in here.
Yeah.
But command an animal is just flat out in nature.
Oh, okay.
They have
Perfect.
Recall knowledge, identify magic, learn a spell, tap ley line, and command an animal.
Okay, cool. So I just need to read my rule book again. I was reading the the diplomacy section and the intimidate section the other day, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, like coerce, I think was one of them, and different things.
Coerce is where you intimidate someone into acting the way you want temporarily.
Yeah. So there were lots of like kind of very specific rules to do certain things, so eventually I feel like with enough experience, I'm going to learn those a little bit better. But right now I'm just kind of like winging it. If you want to intimidate somebody, make an intimidation check. I'm not even following like the coerce.
That's rules, mostly what coerce does.
Yeah.
But what coerce does, the reason why we have things like coerce in there is we want to give some kind of a baseline expectation. So if your players have read the rules, they know what to expect. Whereas in 5e, if I say I want to intimidate like this barkeep into giving me free beer, I don't really know what I'm gonna get into. If I fail, I don't know like what the consequences are necessarily for that. If I succeed, the GM might still in 5e and also some other games I played might be like, he still doesn't give you the beer, but he feels a little spooked that he's shaken and he like kind of looks at you funny.
Yeah.
And it says sod off or something like that. And that could be a success with some GMs in certain systems. So with coerce, it just sort of gives you a baseline expectation that if you critically fail, then they refuse to comply and become hostile to you.
Right.
And you can't even try again for a week because they so much just don't even think that you're a threat. If you regularly fail, then they become unfriendly to you and they don't listen to you. If you succeed, then they will listen to you, but then afterwards they're going to be mad that you made them do that, and they might decide to act against you, like reporting you to the authorities or helping your enemies, depending on their situation. And on a critical success, they're just like, oh crap, yeah, just take the beer, and then they become unfriendly to you afterwards, but they won't act against you because they're just too afraid to act against you later. So you can think of them almost similarly to if you played other like indie RPGs, they'll have like a yes but and a yes just complete success. That's kind of what it is. The success is a partial success where you get what you wanted, but there's a complication for later.
Yeah.
And a critical success is like, and there's not even that many complications because while they don't like you anymore, they're still too afraid. And so that, that's like in Blades in the Dark, the difference is between rolling a 6 would be the just succeed and nothing bad, and roll a 4 or 5 and it's like you made it, but something else is going to happen.
Yeah. So people in chat are mentioning that 5th edition has some stuff on NPC reaction tables and stuff like that.
It does. That's cool. Have some reaction tables, but there's also some degree to which using the skills on them is not as baked into what it does on the reaction tables all the time. But it does actually have the reaction tables, which is interesting because I've seen people literally upset about the reaction tables and like the list of conditions in Pathfinder 2e, and I've like seen other people say the same things to them. It's like, that they exist in 5e too. They have them. They do have those.
Mm-hmm.
And people, wait, really? We never use those.
I think
it's like, no, they're in it.
Yeah, I think the guy in the chat was saying that they're hidden in the back of the Dungeon Master guide.
They're very hidden in the back of the Dungeon Master guide, and a lot of people don't know they exist at all. But they don't necessarily help you run Intimidate all the time, but they are helpful. Don't get me wrong. But interestingly, a lot of people don't use them or even know about them. And the players have a lot of trouble knowing what to expect. And so I've seen players who be like, Pathfinder's too mechanized for my role play because it has these things that 5e actually does have. So it's not even always a good thing to provide a baseline. Some people kind of want it to be more squidgy. They tend to be the same kind of people who are like, well, I described a really good ambush in the windows and the door, and so I want to auto ambush the enemies. And in general, I find that succeeding without a roll works better in like narrative games. A lot of times it's a completely legitimate style of play.
Sure.
But there's a lot of narrative games that will just give you an auto success or like a give you like a fate point or give you a better engagement in rolls in the dark, blades in the dark. I said rolls in the dark, or something else like that. For doing things like that.
Yeah, somebody in chat said people love 5e because they don't read the rules. I think there's an element of truth to that for subgroups, perhaps. If
they play their own, they play their own perfect version of it.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever
that's
they
legitimate.
Like. Yeah, it is. Yeah,
There's no shade on playing your own perfect version of a game. I know that people like to make memes where they like make fun of playing some game heavily modded, where it's like, instead of playing this game without mods, I played this one with 100 mods. But look, I've played heavily modded Pathfinder 1 or 3.5 D&D or just other D&D systems.
Or look like at the Elder Scrolls games. Like, who doesn't use a bunch of mods on those things?
They're great mods on that.
Yeah,
you can come up with mods that are perfect for your group. Might not be good for everybody, but are perfect for your group. And I say no shade. That's a very legitimate play style.
Yeah. Everybody wants to play a different way. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. All right, let's see. So we talked about disengaging and retreating and stuff. Okay, ready to actions. So in 5th edition, I can ready an action. In Pathfinder 2, there's no ready to action.
Yes, there is.
What is it?
It's called ready.
Is it? So, okay, I just need to read my rule book
again. There's a way to ready. Here's what it does. You can't ready everything.
Okay.
Because you could cheese the living heck out of it if you readied like a bunch of actions.
Okay.
You can ready a single action. That means most spells are off the table. So there are some spells that you can ready. By spending 2 actions, you turn it into a reaction that can be used at a trigger of your choice. That's an observable trigger. It needs to be an actual observable trigger that your GM adjudicates to stop any monkey business where you like ready to move right when the enemy is like about to stop moving, so that they have to use like 3 moves to get up to you and don't ever get to attack you. But you, by virtue of spending 2 actions and your reaction, you can do it. And it can be very worth it if you do it at exactly the right time. You could take your first attack and then use a clever ready to do something else.
And you said ready takes 2 actions, and it can only be something that's 1 action.
Yes. Okay. You spend 2 and you get 1 to use as your reaction. So you spend a reaction and 2 actions, and you get 1 action whenever you want. My recommendation, interact. There are so many things you can do if you ready and interact, like close the door right before the enemy's turn and after your ally's turn or something like that. Now you could just delay and go during that time slot. So that's one way to get around it, because you can't delay in D&D and you can in Pathfinder. There's certain times that delaying is very smart, and I think it's an underused strategy.
And that's just moving your initiative order after somebody else, correct?
Correct. Because if the other person, whereas if you ready in Pathfinder 2, you get to keep your original initiative. It doesn't change your initiative. You just get to do something off turn during your reaction. So there's definitely things you could do with ready that can really make things pretty powerful for you, but you have to be clever about it because it does have a pretty high action.
Okay, that's cool. All right, I'm going to ask another question now that might expose my ignorance. What about the disengage action in 5th edition that allows you to not get an opportunity attack? Does that exist?
So the one where you just spend your whole action to move away without an opportunity attack?
Well, it doesn't get you the movement. It just allows you to move if you use your movement. But yeah, basically.
Yes, that's what I mean. You spend your action and then you do the move.
Correct. Yeah. Does that exist in
So
Pathfinder 2?
I would say that for the combination of that, and the best part is you still get to make a strike unless the enemy has tons of reach, is step and then stride. Step and then stride.
Right. So basically so you could attack them.
Just like disengage. You could attack
them, step
out of their opportunity attack, and then stride the rest of the distance.
Right. So it's even better than 5e.
It's even better.
Oh,
now, if the enemy has a lot of reach, you might need to step twice and then stride. Oh no.
Yeah.
Now, if their reach is like 20 feet and you're right at ground zero, you might not be able to get out. You're just going to eat their opportunity.
Now, reach, what I was planning an adventure yesterday, I think, and I got my monsters. I'm looking at my monsters, and some of them are large, and I was like, they don't have reach in the stat block. I was like, what is this?
It says they have reach in the strike, they don't.
Well, but here's the thing. I went to, I think it might have been the Game Mastery Guide, or it was somewhere in the books, and then it was listing the sizes of creatures, and it said, that a large creature usually has a 10-foot reach.
It's a typical thing. It's a typical reach, but it's not a default when it's otherwise unlisted. It's a big problem that people think that it is. So that's a good pitfall to point out. People who just go in and give the that sort of usual reach. Hey, if you're designing a new monster, it might have this reach, but you know what? It might not. Like if you're talking about like a horse, it's like down on the ground and it's long. It's not. It's not the same as something with a really long arm that is going to attack you with it. It can't get very far. Can't really lean in to hit you with its mouth. So
So what you're saying is that if the stat block does a pre-existing stat block doesn't say that it has reach, it doesn't have reach.
Yes.
Okay, because I misinterpreted that.
And individual attacks have a different reach. Yeah. And that's usually an interesting thing about them. So let's take, for example, everyone likes red dragons, right? Like they're on everybody's logo of all time, and your logo is a red dragon.
I don't have a red dragon. That is not a red dragon.
What is it?
Give me a few minutes. Go ahead. What you were saying?
Okay, it looked like a red dragon. Anyway,
it's a sea serpent. It's a red sea serpent.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I like sea serpents too. It just looked like a red dragon. All right, so an adult red dragon in Pathfinder 2e has jaws.
You just failed your insight check, Mark.
There you go. It looked like a dragon to me. It's huge, right? Huge says, typically 15 feet maybe, but its jaws have a reach of 15 feet because its neck is really long. Its claws are a reach of 10 feet. Its tail is a reach of 20 feet.
Right.
And its wing is a reach of 15 feet. So two of them are 15, one is 10, and one is 20. So they all have different reaches. So attacks have their own individual reach, and that listed thing is just to kind of help you design a new monster potentially, but they don't have to have that.
Gotcha.
And it's a big issue with people trying to either misconstruing it like you did or intentionally cheese weaseling and being like, well, I found a thing that made me large. It did not say it gave me reach. I think I should automatically get reach because I found this table that said you usually get reach.
That's what I did. I was like,
I don't think it was a cheese weasel. I think you were legitimately misconstruing that table. I'm talking about players who were like, I found an option to turn me up to large. It doesn't say it also gives me reach, even though these other options all say they give me reach. But I'm going to assume that it gives me reach anyway in my character build because
cheese weasel. That's a new term. Cheese weasel. All right, nice.
Yes, cheese weasel.
All right, here's a question.
Okay.
How can Game Master prep be less of a time suck? Prepping for a session 1 and it's been intense. Last Saturday I spent 14 hours prepped 4 hours every weekday. It feels like too much.
Wow. Prepping is rough. I had to prep as much as you did back when I ran Pathfinder First Edition. Let me tell you, it was so epic when we actually played those sessions. I was able to create multi-tiered encounters with a boss that comes back and their hands are separate monsters and there's these giant set piece fights.
Yeah.
But it took 14 hours and my players would kill them in 3 rounds. But it was maybe
that's the thing. They dead. But I spent so much time making that monster.
It was maybe not the most efficient use of my time, but everyone really enjoyed it. But Pathfinder 2 specifically is a game that when you get a little more used to it, I think you will find, and I have found this, that is way less in prep. In fact, to the point that I will make this dramatic statement, which is 100% true for me. And I'm someone who played the heck out of Pathfinder 1 more than I've played Pathfinder 2 in total because I played Pathfinder 1 for so many years. And also when I was in college, so I have more time to play. And so I was very experienced in Pathfinder 1. I could make 20th level games and really weird high level games work that usually broke. It took me so long to prep. I had to rewrite published adventures if I was writing them completely from scratch, write all the enemies and other encounters. So I will tell you that taking a Pathfinder 1 adventure as written, published adventure, and converting it into Pathfinder 2 as I go, good enough for me to run it, but not good enough for me to like publish it and have all the words written down correctly.
Yeah.
Is much faster than taking a Pathfinder 1 adventure for me and running it in Pathfinder 1 for my group. Because I have to change the things like I just said, or it won't work. Because my group is very strong and the things in the adventure will just crumple like wet tissue paper in Pathfinder 1.
Right.
And I didn't know this was going to happen, but no Pathfinder 2 APs were out, adventure paths were out when I was trying to run it. I was trying to play test the game. So I was like, well, my group wanted to play War for the Crown, where you are agents who are trying to put the princess candidate that you want on the throne of this country. So I was like, you know what? I know it's Pathfinder 1. I'm going to convert it. I didn't know how hard it was going to be. It turned out to be way less time consuming. So I would say get to know some of the encounter and monster building rules from Pathfinder 2, because when you get good at using them, possibly get the GM screen. I know that may be a contentious piece of advice, because as someone who doesn't roll behind a screen to hide my rolls, I do put my notes behind them sometimes. I also sometimes have had issues with official screens where they always have not what I needed on the screen.
Dude,
it's always like, I don't care about what's on this screen. I was like, the front looks beautiful, but like on the back, it's like, this is not something I want.
Oh, quick tangent. One of the things that the Pathfinder 2 screen, it's perfect. It's got it's like, oh my, like literally when I'm prepping for my game, I get the screen out and I sit right here across my desk so I can refer to everything. It's like, it's the screen I want. You know what I mean?
Luke did not work on that screen.
No.
I worked to help Logan Bonner. I would say that the main majority of how brilliant that screen's layout is Logan and not me. But I did help him on that. So I am biased. I am biased on the selection, but I think, and even including screens I somewhat helped with in other editions as well, that the only screen to me that has all the things I want is the Pathfinder 2 screen, or the advanced Pathfinder screen if you're very advanced, because that has like all the monster building stuff so you can kind of build them on the fly, but it's missing some of the things that you probably need unless you're very
dude. And there's a one little detail too on the Pathfinder 2 screen that I love. It lists the page numbers in the core books if I want to go read it there. It's like it was designed by geniuses. I love it. It's So
yes, thank you. It's better when you say it than when I do in some ways, because I'm biased, but I just think it's a good GM screen. Logan, like, knocked that one out of the park.
Yeah, and when I look at it too, this is the first thought that goes through my mind. This Game Master screen was designed by people who actually play the game. Because there are some Game Master, like my 5th edition Game Master screen, the first one that I got, it's like, do these people play the game? Like, I'm not going to use any of this garbage on here. You know what I mean? So it's like, this is worthless. So like when I saw the Pathfinder 2 one, I was literally, my first thought was, these people who designed this screen literally play the game. They actually play the game, and they know what a game master needs to reference. And so it's just like, this is beautiful. So anyway,
we all ran and played so many playtests.
Yeah.
So Logan had an initial list that was already great. Yeah. He was like, these are all the things I always had to look up when we were doing everything. Yeah. And he was like, Mark, can you tell me anything else? And I was like, I can't even remember what I added. It was like 1 or 2 things. I was like, you might want to consider these, but I don't know what we'll have to lose to get them on there, because all the things on your list were good.
Right.
And so he put that all together. He figured out where to put each thing so that they would not only like look nice, but also be easy to use together in combination, which is he's very talented at a variety of things. Actually has like an art degree too. So like, he worked on that with the art team who did the actual layout of it to perfect it. And I just think it's a good GM screen. So I would say that will help you more than you would expect if, like me, you're used to the GM screen not being very helpful.
Right. So back to the original question about prepping less time. So this is my trick for reducing my prep time. So if there are literally 2 things that if I do them, I can run a game session. It might not be the world's best game session, but I can get through a game session and I'll be okay. I need a map. give me a map. I'll get a pre-made map. I have a patronage to Seafoot Games, I believe. I'll go in, I'll grab a map that is mostly what I need. All right. 2, I design my encounters. I build my encounters so that I make sure I have the difficulty I'm going for. Okay. And then I decide where those encounters are going to be on my map. I'm done. With that information, I can run the adventure. I might have like a story idea or a plot in my mind. I'll need one of those, right? But as long as I have that in my brain, then I can run an adventure and I can improvise based upon the map. I can improvise the contents of the room or the area and what things are, and then I'll probably, before the game begins, I'll need to like read the monster stat block so I know how to run the monsters in combat and stuff like that. But most of the other details, if you can get good at improvising them and making them up on the fly, you can reduce your prep time amazingly. But the key is that everybody's a little bit different. So as a game master, there are things that I feel perfectly comfortable improvising, and there are things that I don't. And so what I do is before the game, I make sure that I have set the things that I don't want to improvise. And then the things that I'm comfortable improvising, I don't worry about it, okay? And that will be like the perfect balance of prepping just enough, but not doing more than I need. Now, that said, for my standard games, I prep more than I probably need because I don't want it to just be an okay game. I'm trying to run like a really good game, Like for instance, that one shot that I'm doing for my moderators and my teammates, like I did my basic prep, but then we're streaming it and stuff, and I want it to be a good game. So I'm like, I can't just do my basic prep. I need to do a little bit more to make this a little bit snazzier. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the basic trick. Don't improvise too much, or don't prep too much. Just do the bare minimum of what you need, and then improvise the rest.
I think that's like the first law of dungeon craft from like Ray Winage, or maybe the 0th law is don't over prepare more detail than you actually need on something. And it's definitely true, but that doesn't always help someone who's like, well, I don't know how much I need. But it really is true that if you can teach yourself the basics and even just you improvise your way through a little bit of the time, there's a lot that you can come up with on the fly if you need to. And you can get good if you make a little castle out of both GM screens, so you do have the monster stats on the back of your screen. You could just pull the ones off the line. It's not going to be the best monster in the world, but if you just pull off the ones that are like, okay, this is a soldier, which are supposed to have high accuracy and high armor class, and high damage, but not extreme. So I'll just pull those values and just throw it onto this monster and give it special ability. I guess it's it's with soldier goblin wearing pot armor, so maybe it has like a clang the pot special ability, and then you can just kind of brew up the monster on the fly using that, and it's not going to be the greatest, but you could probably make it work without even having it in advance.
I think even the idea of creating custom monsters and stuff like that, you
don't have to. You could reflavor a monster that exists.
I almost never create custom monsters. I almost never create custom, like especially in Pathfinder 2 right now, custom traps, hazards. I just take stuff out of the book, right? I might reflavor it, to the description of it's different, but the mechanics.
Nobody's gonna know.
Nobody will know.
Even if you're like, okay, I need something that is a giant regenerating Wolverine.
That's a troll.
Yeah, that's a troll. I'm not going to tell them it's a troll, but it can, assuming fire and acid are still okay to stop this Wolverine from regenerating, and maybe it has adamantine claws that come out of its hands because it's from the X-Men. And so I'll give it that, which doesn't really matter unless the PCs have stone skin. And then I use the troll stats that just called it a Wolverine, and it'll work fine. Like when you want to run low prep Pathfinder 2, you can do that. You can do it in 5e as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty easily. I'm not saying that 5e can't do low prep. In fact, 5e is much better for that than Pathfinder 1. PF2 is actually pretty strong on low prep because your prep will actually result usually in encounters that are like of the appropriate challenge. Whereas in 5e, you can do it low prep. It'll work okay, but like you said, Luke, it's probably they're going to roll over it. But they probably would if you did high prep as well. So
yeah. And I feel like the other part too of being able to prep less is to use pre-made resources too. Like for instance, for Pathfinder 2, like I'm going into the hazards, I'm going into the monsters, I'm using the resources that are there. you know? And so like, for instance, if you don't like designing adventures, and that's not fun for you, or perhaps you're just getting used to it, you know, you can get pre-made adventures, you know, like for instance, my team and I publish Lair magazine. So you can get adventures that you can drag and drop into your games for Pathfinder 2 or for 5th edition, or we have traps, we have puzzles, you know. So like there are pre-existing resources out there that you can use too to reduce your prep time, you know. And the trick to using them, I feel like, is as a game master, figure out what you enjoy about being a game master. What is the part that you like doing? Like I like designing adventures. So I don't use pre-made adventures, but I do not like designing monsters. I don't like designing traps. I hate designing puzzles. So those are the things that I am going to go out. Like I literally, when I run games, I have to have a puzzle, I will go to Lair magazine and I'll get puzzles. And what I usually do is, because we have like the lead time on publishing them is so long, I'll go to a future issue that hasn't been published yet and I'll take a puzzle from there for my game or something, you know. But use the resources there and steal from the things that you don't like doing, you know, and the things you do enjoy doing, we'll do that yourself. You know, like if you enjoy designing monsters and that makes you happy and you feel fulfilled, do that, right? So you want to cut out the things you don't like and then maybe use pre-made resources for those things, you know. So that's probably another thing too, to reduce your prep time, but also to make sure that you're engaging with the parts of the game that you like the most, that make you feel satisfied. And the parts that you don't like doing, try not to do it, you know, and get other stuff that you can just drag and drop, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's hit some more here. Okay, party composition of PCs. Does it matter? Like if you have, so like in 5th edition, it kind of matters, but it's not that big of a deal if you don't have a dedicated healer, for instance, although it can definitely make things easier. But in Pathfinder 2, if you, for instance, you don't have anybody that can heal, like nobody can do 10 wounds or treat wounds or whatever it is. There's nobody with like combat medic skills. You have no healer and stuff. Or let's say you don't have a tank. How does that affect things in Pathfinder 2? Do the players need to be concerned about party composition too much?
I would say that to an extent that they would need to be more concerned than in 5e, but only because in 5e you don't like you said, you don't need party composition because you're like your warlock paladin dip combination character team that just are all that build could just curb stop the enemies before you need healing or tanking. They're just, the enemies are dead. So that's true in Pathfinder 1 also. I'm absolutely not limiting it to 5e. In fact, most editions in D&D had some kind of broken combo that existed, and Pathfinder 1 that was so busted that you would just kind of win. And so all of the optimization guides just usually told you just go all offense, because then the enemies can't even do anything. So you don't need the defense.
Yeah.
In Pathfinder 2, you somewhat more need a balanced party because it is less busted. And there's not really degenerate combinations that will just guarantee you the victory. But that is the only amount, to the extent at which you need to be a little more balanced. You don't need to have exactly any one particular combination. And you might find that weird combinations that don't sound like the classic party of fighter, rogue, cleric, and wizard actually turn out to be amazing. Like, I don't know, like fighter, bard. Yeah. That's very imbalanced, but is actually probably a pretty strong team. Fighter, bard. I think it could do great. Or like a team that's all thaumaturges could probably do pretty okay. Or like champion cleric. A team that's all defense and healing, and it's just like you will never kill them ever.
Might take a while to get through the combats, but they're not.
Yeah. Well, Luke, that's the answer to your other problem, which is Pathfinder 2 combats were too fast, and so you weren't sure how you were gonna have enough material, so you just had them play champion cleric, and suddenly you fixed it. Yeah. But that's the cool thing, is that you're constantly going to be finding new and weird combinations that work if you talk to your fellow players, synergize, and think of combinations that work with them. Yeah. You could even have a group that, and now when I said those 3 groups I said could be good, you could have a group that is exactly those classes and it's terrible. If the players don't work well together, or just the build of those classes don't work. Like if one of the fighters is like, I'm built around protecting everyone else in melee, and I'm going to charge up into melee, and the other fighters are like, that's nice. The bard and the two of us are all archers. We're staying in the back. And the fighter's like, but if I flank the opponents, I'll get bonuses. Like, yeah, nobody's flanking with you, dude. We're all back here. Yeah. You can wind up with problems that are regardless of the class based on play style and builds. So the fun of it is working together and finding synergies that you never expected, that might even outperform the classic balanced party. Now, that being said, I certainly wouldn't suggest putting all your eggs in one basket. If every single person is playing like a fire-based sorcerer, and then you fight something that's immune to fire, chances are that, and you all load up on only fire spells, chances are that you're really in big trouble at that point. Yeah. You maybe shouldn't have done that. Like, arguably, that was a mistake. So, like, there are ways to mess yourself up. There are. But I would say that creative combinations can generally work pretty well. The one thing you want to avoid, though, is you don't need a cleric. Okay? You don't even necessarily need to have someone who is like very cleric-ish, but not a cleric. Like, it's like, well, I said you didn't need a cleric, but that's because you have to have a life oracle. I don't mean that either. But you should have at least someone who can patch you up after the fight. And if you don't have anyone who can patch you up in the fight at all, you'll want to consider consumables or thinking about damage mitigation, because your inability to get hit points back means that damage mitigation becomes more important for you. If you have no healing and no damage mitigation and you refuse to buy consumables, you could be in trouble even if you do have some out of combat healing. So I would say that's one example of something that I would suggest. I'm sure that it's possible to come up with a group that can handle things without doing that. It's going to be rough because the game was not designed around the idea that you can just win with all offense all the time. That's essentially what you're trying to do. And bad RNG, where like crits happen against you, you can't control it as easily if you don't have mitigation or healing. That can just sort of be like, we're fine. Oh, we died.
Yeah. So as a reminder to folks in chat, we do have a giveaway going on. There should be a link in chat somewhere for you. Basically, we're giving away a physical copy of Into the Fae. It's a level 1 to 5 adventure module for 5th edition. If you're interested, we'll be drawing the winner at the end of the stream in about an hour or so. And you can also get store credit on the DM Lair store. We have tons of other resources for folks as well. And I need to take my dog outside because she's about to go potty on the floor here. But what I'd like to get into is I had a question about, where was it? The importance of rolling individual initiative versus group initiative, because a lot of game masters in 5e roll group initiative for their monsters. So if you could start talking about why in Pathfinder 2e it seems like you should be rolling individual initiative for monsters and why that's usually the way it's done. And I can still hear you, but I'll be outside.
I will absolutely do that. So basically, when we're talking about group initiative or batch initiative, as some people call it, that is when like the GM is just like, all my monsters go together no matter what. So batch initiative is just kind of terrible, especially for the PCs, in every game system. It just is not good. And you know what? In chat, somebody said individual initiatives is a terrible mechanic that needs to go. So, all right, I hear you. I'm going to say that batch initiative is terrible, and I'm going to explain why. It's terrible for the PCs because it's very swingy over the course of games in a way that is problematic, and it's bad, especially if the GM is absolutely adamant that it's a batch and it cannot be broken up. If it can't be broken up, it gets even worse. I ran into a GM like that in Pathfinder 1st edition where, like, literally, not only did he not let his batch get broken up, he didn't tell me that when he was like, okay, I'm batching them all together. And I said, okay, this is a problem for us, so I'm going to delay until halfway through the batch with my healer and then come out of delay and heal. He was like, okay. And then when I tried to do it, he's like, no, you can't. You're going to go after all of them. And I said, but I delayed so that I could split up the batch with my healer. If you just make me go after all of them, I basically skip my turn. I didn't do anything at that point. So the problem with batch initiative is that it is incredibly swingy, and it doesn't make any sense necessarily that everything is always going at the same time. So you can have a lot of encounters that are a serious problem, especially if there are a group of enemies, especially if there's a group of enemies with area of effect. I have heard more than one story about certain encounters, and some of them are in published adventures where it's like, this encounter has 8 vampires who all throw a fireball. And the GM used batch initiative. They threw in a natural 20 on the vampires. All 8 of the vampires went. They all threw fireballs. It did 80d6, and the entire party died. It's because of the fact that being able to interleave your initiative in between each other, and sometimes naturally it winds up like that, even though you didn't roll batch initiative, in which case that was very bad luck. It won't happen very often. That is the case where it's like, yep, all 8 vampires rolled natural 20s. It was a 1 in 20 to the 8th power. Let's see. That was a 1 out of, it was 4 times 10 to the negative 11th. So it's like 1 in less than a billion chance that happens. So the problem is that if everything goes together, then it is just drastically going to create weird combinations, and being able to break up lets you do much more tactical style gameplay. Now, that being said, PF2 absolutely allows the GM to do batch initiative. It just warns them that batch initiative can lead to some really terrible stuff that can happen, and then kind of suggests that they don't. And that if you do, that you at least, like, if you have a giant group of like 16 things, maybe you group them into like groups of 2 to 4 so that they don't all go together all the time. Like, batch initiative is just very very problematic, and leads to like all or nothing blowouts a lot of the time. That being said, like, it's still allowed in PF2. It's one of the rules just literally say you can do this whichever of those 2 ways you want. We just suggest that you do not use batch initiative.
Yeah, that when you were talking about like the vampires doing fireballs all at the very beginning and just wiping everybody, that reminds me.
It's a real adventure. I'm not making this up.
No,
and the vampire stat block in Pathfinder 1 is a sorcerer who has fireball.
And that reminds me of my game I had last night. It was a 5th edition game, but there were ring servants that all have a burst. It's a 20-foot radius burst that does a lot of damage. And there were 5 of them. And I didn't quite use batch because 2 of them were spellcasters, and so I gave the spellcasters their own rounds. But 3 of these monsters went first, and they all moved up. The characters were clustered together, most of them. All 3 of them moved up, and I'm like, they should use their most powerful attack because they're going to die in 1 round or 2 rounds. And so all 3 of them bursted. I think it was 10d8 damage. It was a lot. By the time all 3 of them bursted, 2 of the PCs only had like 30 hit points left. They're at level 16. So that's a lot to get burned down. And then 2 of the others were pretty wounded too. And so in the first round of combat, 3 of them bursted, and the PCs were like, wow, this is bad. And if I had used batch for all 5 of them, and all 5 of them had bursted, I would have had 2 dead PCs, guarantee you, on the first round of combat before anybody could do anything at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And with those vampires, you could have in Pathfinder 1, they would probably be dead. The death or dying rules were real brutal in Pathfinder 1. Mm-hmm. And even if they did half damage, it still might have taken out some PCs with low hit points back then, because there was no way to critically succeed and take none. It was unless you were like a rogue or a monk.
Right.
And you could take none on a success.
Now,
I saw someone in chat who said they had a GM who did something even worse, who used batch saving throws, where it's just like, oh, I did a hypnotic pattern or a fireball. I'll roll once. Oh, they all save. That's bad for the same reason.
Right.
Basically, if you are the party, so first of all, having everything fail and be taken out of the fight is boring. But it's still better than everything succeeding and then wiping out the PCs against your thing and then wiping out the PCs. And so when you're the PCs and you want to survive in the long term, anything that's really swingy is against you in the long term. Even if you think it's good, it's not good. So for example, like something like a special rule where like on a natural 20, not only do you crit, but you could roll again. And if it's a 20 again, then they die. Like I've seen people make up house rules like that.
Yeah.
And anything like that, no matter how fun it seems when you do it to the boss or another monster, and no matter how much you're like, well, the PCs are rolling 20 times as many attacks, so they'll get to see this 20 times often. That's true. But and then any individual monster. But the PCs are also in the adventure for long enough that they will over time be killed by this.
Right. Absolutely.
And they will be killed by this way more often than a given villain will.
The standard like refrain that I will hear from game masters is that rolling individual initiative takes too much time, and we end up spending more time. This is what they say, and it's got to be a gross exaggeration, otherwise they're doing something wrong, but they'll say we spend more time rolling initiative than the combat itself takes. And so that is the complaint that I will typically see that argues against rolling individual initiative.
So I guess I'm wondering how many opponents are in the fight. Like, did the PCs not roll individual initiative?
No, I think the PCs do, but
okay,
the monsters
but like,
don't.
let's say you have four enemies.
There are still groups that will have batch for both PCs and monsters. Like that's how they do it. All the PCs go, then all the monsters go, or vice versa.
It's like Fire Emblem. Everybody turns gray when they're deactivated. Then it's like player turn, and then everybody moves.
Something, yeah.
Enemy turn.
Yeah.
But like, just in general, if there's 4 monsters, how long does it take to roll 4 initiative?
Exactly, and this is the part I don't understand because people will say it takes so long, and I'm just like, how are you figuring out initiative that it takes that long?
Or maybe the encounter is really fast. How do you run it? Like, okay, let's assume that initiative is a normal, reasonable amount of time that you could possibly take. How are you finishing the rest of the fight that quickly?
I don't know.
If it takes longer to roll initiative.
I'm
really fast. I'm impressed that I would, or maybe I'm not impressed if it makes it less fun to play fights that only take 2 minutes to finish the entire encounter. I don't know. I've never been in a PF2 fight that takes 2 minutes, and I can't possibly see how initiative will take longer than that unless you're running something gigantic.
Yeah, I think.
In fact, one time, my partner Linda ran an encounter with 80 opponents, and it still took less than 2 minutes for her to get that initiative.
Yeah,
I could see it taking longer, but how is it going to take longer than a fight to roll for 4 characters?
I bring it up because it is the common refrain that I see, and I think that it's a gross exaggeration, and it's just a flimsy reasoning or something. I don't understand it because I would have to observe the group floundering for 10 minutes rolling initiative before I believe it, because it just seems so implausible, you know?
Okay, well, if you have a group that hates rolling initiative and that does not want to do that, then you can maybe come up with some other way to figure things out. Like, it's real boring because the same people will go first every time, but you could just say that get a stack of note cards with everyone's initiative modifier, and whoever has the highest goes first. The problem with that is it's going to wind up batching if they're all the same monster. But at least if they're not the same monster, they might not go at the same time. There are other ways to do it. Shadow of the Demon Lord has something that also has something like 3 actions, but basically the monsters always go first in that system. And if you want to go first, you can, but you only get 2 actions because you spend 1 going first, which is kind of cool. Especially since you can go last on one turn and then on the next turn go first, so you kind of go twice in a row by doing that. You can come up with ways to get around it, but at the end of the day, it's bad for the PCs to let things be batched in the long run, even though sometimes it will create things that seem good for them but are very boring, where the enemies just got so slaughtered by the time they could act that they never make up for it because they rolled a natural 1 and all of them acted at the end of the round, and the PCs got to throw everything they had at them.
All right, we have a really cool question in chat that I need to get to this because this brings up something really cool. So I'm going to ask the question as a tease, and then we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and answer it because I'm mean like that. So the question in chat is, if you had to redo the magic system, would you still use Vancian spellcasting exactly as is, or would you change it somehow? And so I want to talk about Vancian spellcasting. We'll define what it is, and then all that kind of stuff. But we'll take a quick break first, and then we'll be back momentarily.
Hi, Barbarian here, and I'm interrupting this wonderful live stream to tell you about the secret art of game mastery. That's the next DM Lair Kickstarter! Before you ignore this sleazy plug, please allow me to threaten you with violence and bloodshed. Trust me, you do not want me to track you down. Anyway, what the DM Lair team did was take their accumulated experience as game masters, over 100 years combined in a variety of game systems, and cram it all into one book. Whether you've been running RPGs for decades or you're a new game master who's freaking out and hyperventilating in the corner, trust me, the secret art of game mastery is just what you need. It'll give you new tips and tricks you've never thought of, or just help you survive your next game session. Everything is system agnostic too, so it doesn't matter if you're running Pathfinder, D&D, Call of Cthulhu, Shadowrun, Savage Worlds, or something else. This book is for you. The Secret Art of Game Mastery Kickstarter launches in August, but if you click the link below, you can follow the project and get notified when it goes live. So yeah, do that right now before I come looking for you.
Oh, I got back just in time. Whee! Okay, cool. So Vancian spellcasting. So Vancian spellcasting, for folks who are not aware with that term, it's the idea that you have to prepare the spells you're going to cast before you cast them. So 5th edition D&D is not Vancian. So as long as I have the spells prepared, or for instance, a sorcerer might just have them in the spells that they know, I can choose on the fly which spells I cast. So if I have 3 slots at first level, I might decide to cast a magic missile, and then later on I'm like, oh, magic missile again, and then later on magic missile a third time. With Vancian spellcasting, if I have 3 slots, I have to decide during my daily preparations, one of them is a magic missile, one of them is a shield spell, and one of them is like something else, right? And then during a combat, I have access to those 3 options only and no other options. So that's the difference between the two systems. And non-Vancian and Vancian, I guess, is what the terms would be. And so Pathfinder 2 uses Vancian, which is something from earlier editions of D&D. I think were also Vancian.
It's named after Jack Vance from the Dying Earth series, where people memorized spell formulas, which were erased from their mind after they memorized them.
Okay, perfect.
And cast them.
Yeah, so 5th edition D&D doesn't use it. Pathfinder 2 does use it. So I guess, first of all, let's ask, what was the design decision around Vancian, and why did you guys decide you wanted to use Vancian?
So I think that to answer that question, you have to understand that Pathfinder, a lot of people ask, like, why did Pathfinder change X, where X is what was done in 5th edition?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the right question to ask, though, because Pathfinder did not start with 5th edition.
Mm-hmm.
5th edition was not even fully out when some of the very early concepting from Pathfinder was done. It was out before much work was done at all on Pathfinder 2, but Pathfinder 2 started with Pathfinder 1. It did not start with 5e. Pathfinder 1 had Vancian magic. So the only answer that you really need for why was Vancian magic on the table was the thing that was being started with, and that the goal was to keep the narrative the same, so it felt like you could tell the same stories you could in Pathfinder 1, even if the game mechanics changed a lot.
So it wasn't it
was always a strong possibility that it was going to stay for that reason.
Yeah.
Like 5e,
but there wasn't. But I guess there wasn't a game design reason. As far as like rules mechanics and stuff that you picked Vancian. Literally the Vancian.
I mean, there just wasn't enough of a game design reason not to pick it.
Okay.
I mean, it's what I was saying. People are like, why did there have to be a reason to pick it? But at that point, there was inertia. There were things that we wanted to change, that we knew that the fans of the first game might not be okay with, and they might be.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to make changes that we didn't have to. We wanted to limit the changes to ones we knew were going to be big play-style improvements. And frankly, changing wizards and the prepared casters to be like 5e while keeping spontaneous casters being more limited just is very imbalanced. It makes spontaneous casters bad. So I don't think that we ever thought of doing that because we already had our way of doing it before, 5e was out. So it didn't start with what 5e did. We do have that style of casting as an optional variant that I wrote in Secrets of Magic called flexible spellcasting, and you lose some of your slots per day to get it. So it comes at a significant cost, but it's very powerful. It's actually even more robust because you can prepare and then spontaneously use them, and you basically have an infinite number of signature spells, so you can mix and match everything you want. But you get a very limited number of spells each day, so it really does come at a cost.
I think so. There's the advancing, non-advancing debate and stuff, and now that I've been playing Pathfinder 2 a little bit at least, and seen the Vancian more in action, obviously it was in other editions too, but one of the things I've noticed is that spellcaster turns seem to go a lot faster, because instead of having like, I don't know, 30 prepared spells to choose from, you have the ones that you prepared in those slots, maybe 9. Your options are fewer. Right. And so when you have fewer options, and this is a spellcaster problem, right? When you have fewer options, that takes less time. Like, you ever go to Taco Bell, look at their stupid menu, and then there's stuff on their menu that's not even on the boards. Like, you could spend 15 minutes deciding what kind of taco you want. You know what I mean? But if you go to something like Five Guys hamburgers and fries, like, you're getting a hamburger and you're getting fries. The only question is do they have shakes or not? Because some locations don't have shakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It takes you less time.
No, it's worse than it seems. Like, let's play a game. So we are a flexible prepared caster. So aka 5e style, but we're in PF2. So we have, let's say we're a wizard, and so we reduce down to 3 spell slots per level because of the way that we work from 4 because of flexible casting. So we're doing that. We're having some fun. We have 3 spots at each level. Let's say we pick ones that can heighten because we knew what we're doing and we're being a flexible spellcaster. We're level, we're the highest level that there is. We're level 18. Maybe we don't have 10th level spell yet because that's a single spell. We've got the max number of 9th level spells and below. How many spells do you think that they would have to choose from on any given round? So we've got 3 each of 1st through 9th. How many choices are there? Some of them very bad choices that you probably don't want to actually cast.
So you have 9 times 3, 27's the math, right?
No, it's worse. And by worse, I mean there's more.
Okay.
You have 27 9th level spells you could cast, because you could cast any of the ones from 1st through 8th heightened up to 9th. Then you have 24 8th level spells for 51. Then you have 21 7th level spells for 72. And the way you can calculate that is if you add 27 to 3, that makes 30. And there's 4.5 pairs of 30. So you wind up with, I think, 135 spells to choose from. And 5e essentially is similar to that. Now, you don't get as many choices prepared in 5e that you can cast at the various levels, but if you count each level and each prepared spell that can be in that level as different options, which they are, right? Summon monster at 1 versus or animal at 1 versus 2 versus 3 versus 4. You have 135 options, whereas the prepared spellcaster 27. That was correct. The Vancian. The Vancian is 27.
Yeah.
So the Vancian caster has around a little, like it's around 1/5 to 1/6.
Yeah.
It's much, and that's at level, that's at very high levels, but it's much more manageable.
Right.
In terms of analysis process. That's not why exactly, but it is a benefit of
it. And
now,
as a game master, when I'm running monster stat blocks and I get a spellcaster in 5th edition, I have this massive list of spells. And so before I run that monster in combat, what I have to do is I have to read the spells. I have to, basically I cross out the stupid ones that will never get used. And then I pick the ones that are actually useful and that I can actually use. But when I go to Pathfinder 2, my list is like, 9 spells that I can choose from. And most of the time, there tend to be useful spells too, from what I've seen in my little limited experience with it. You know what I mean? So
usually it depends on what you picked. If you foolishly choose like something like you're very high level and you put an incapacitation spell or a low level damaging spell in a first level slot that's weaker than your cantrip, maybe it won't be a good choice. But there are other spells you could have put in there that would have still been something interesting.
I guess what I'm saying is the monsters that I've seen are that come in the bestiary 1, 2, and 3.
Monsters usually don't even bother with those. That's the great thing about monsters.
Yeah, and so anyway, my point is that as a game master too, it makes it easier for me to run my monsters and go faster. Because like, if you're a game master and you got to run a whole bunch of opponents, and then you get to the spellcasters and you got to make a bunch of decisions, it can slow things down too. And so the Vancian system is one of the things that I think contributes to combat going a bit faster in Pathfinder 2, at least from my experience. I haven't been in high level
maybe
stuff.
A little bit.
I haven't been in high level stuff, so I don't know how it would look there. You know,
I'm gonna be honest, at level 18 of those 135 spells, you're probably not gonna, like I said to start, you're probably not gonna cast some of those really low level ones at their lowest level. Like maybe you only had to consider half. And that would be true in both cases. So instead of 27, you had to consider 13. And instead of 135, you had to consider 67. But you still, 13 is way easier to consider than 67. 13 I can actually do. 67 is like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of options to choose from.
Right.
And in some cases, people in chat are saying, well, in 5e, though the scaling is so bad that you don't want to heighten the lower level spells. But in PF2, some of the spells heighten great, like summon animal, or maybe some of the summons with weird, more esoteric things in them are just, that is like, there's nothing that is actually better about the summon spells that come in at higher levels. It's just that the things that they summon are not low level monsters. So there wouldn't have been lists for you to summon if they came in at a lower level than they did. So like Summon Dragon is a 5th level spell, I think, and it's not more powerful than like the 1st and 2nd level spells to summon Fae and aberrations. Or the undead summoning, that's level 1. So however, I'm not saying that Vancian is like the greatest spellcasting system ever made in any RPG. There's lots of good spellcasting systems that exist out there in many different RPGs that you may want to consider. Even in Pathfinder 2, there are ways to play a magical character that's not a Vancian spellcaster, or even a spellcaster. Not only spontaneous, but like a thaumaturge class that I wrote in Dark Archive is very magical, but they're actually a martial character. They just do weird magical stuff with items and symbolism. Or to go back to the elemental avatar class that I'm writing in the Eldamon trainer, they have elemental powers, but they're not Vancian. They're on a cycle. So they even more aren't an illusion of choice where you can repeat, because you literally can't repeat your turns. You have a set of abilities and you can use each one once, and then you do a refresh action where you like draw in fire from around you and get some minor benefits, and then you get all your fire abilities back. So you have to figure out how to use each of your powers situationally in a good place and mix it up. And that's that spellcasting system. It doesn't even have a per daily limit. It is literally at will, other than the fact that you'll need to draw in your refresh action to start the cycle again. You can come up with all sorts of systems in any game, and you want to build systems that meet your goals. And essentially, when it comes to not obsoleting the spontaneous caster, I feel that having flexible casting be out there as the only option and considered to be equal does not meet that goal. Whereas having flexible casting cost spell slots and be an option, the one that's more 5e style, that's great. It's like you made a choice. You got something very powerful. You paid something to get that.
You brought up the illusion of the choice thing, and a comment that I had from back when we were talking about that conversation was, is it better to have illusion of even if you only have illusion of a choice? Isn't illusion of choice better than like no choice at all? Like if you think there's a choice, even if there isn't that still better than knowing that there's not a choice? I guess that's some sort of like philosophical question.
That's the one to go back to the very beginning, which is like, is life an illusion of choice? Like, is society and the economy that is built put in a way that it can trap us into these little bubbles where we like think we're going to be doing okay, and we have our sort of our dreams and our expectations that are based on what we saw growing up, but the prices of everything are being priced farther and farther outside of what we can reach, and everything's an illusion. Like, yes, okay, we could be living in the Matrix too, right? But there's an argument to be made, and I'm not going to tell you that nothing's an illusion and everything's real. because there is some degree to which everything is an illusion if you think of it in like certain philosophical ways. But I would say that at the very least, the way that term is being used in that one virally insincere video is very, very inaccurate and is not really true of the system at all. But it definitely turned a lot of people off of the system because it was kind of taken as gospel at the time. It possibly did more damage to like people being willing to adopt the system than most any other publicity things that I saw, because it was so dishonest while being like thrown around so many places.
Dang. Yeah, I get a feeling you guys don't like that video.
I mean, yeah, I've seen other designers talk about it as well. On you can find it in a subreddit where someone else talks about it.
Yeah,
like it's pretty disingenuous. But I mean, it happens sometimes.
Yeah, I'll have to go watch that at some point. I don't usually watch a whole lot of YouTube videos, at least not D&D and Pathfinder 2 related. I'm usually watching other stuff. I like watching there's a channel called Donut Operator. He does like police shooting breakdowns and stuff. I can't watch enough of those things. But anyway, those are just super interesting. All right, let's see. I had another chat over here. I wondered, do you find there's a lot of difference in the dynamic of 3-player party versus a 4-player party?
Yes. I'd say that there are. So in general, the game is fairly resilient to changing your party members. It talks about how to adjust the XP budget for the enemies. And it does say if you're going down in size, you may need to adjust more than the amount that it said due to the lack of synergy. There's another. So first of all, you lose number of characters, so you get a smaller like tool set. Second of all, though, and more importantly, is sort of like resiliency, by which I mean, if something terrible happens to Luke's character in our 4-person group, the other 3 of us are still 75% of the group. But if something bad happens to Luke's character in our 3-person group, the other 2 of us are only 2/3 of the group. So we've lost more of the group to one bad roll. And so you need to keep that in mind. That's part of the reason why it suggests that you may want to go beyond the numbers on the budgets and even adjust more in the favor of the player characters if you're going down in size. Whereas up in size, you can just use the numbers that it says and you'll be just fine. But that's the thing to watch out for. It's just that like, if everything's going fine and everybody's acting, nothing bad happens to anybody, then 3 is just going to do as well as 3 in most cases.
Now, what about in the case of if a player doesn't show up? Like, let's pretend I design my adventures for 5 characters, and a player doesn't show up to a game session. What would the effect be if I just left all of my encounters as is and 4 characters had to run encounters that were designed for 5 characters? How impactful would that be? Because in 5th edition, I would do that without even thinking about it. It's not that big of a deal. But Pathfinder 2, it seems like the math is a little tighter. So what would be the impact?
What would be the impact of... Can you repeat the details on that question again?
Right. So I have 5 players in my group. I design my adventure for 5 players. One doesn't show up. I got 4 players now, 4 characters, and I want to run the same adventure without redoing all my encounters.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Is that okay, or is that going to be a problem?
I would say that if you do that, it's going to be a little bit harder. In 5e, for the reasons you said, which is that they were just going to win anyway. So you're essentially throwing them against deadly encounters when you didn't mean to, but it doesn't matter because they can beat the deadly encounters. In Pathfinder, if you were already throwing something that was very hard, it could possibly put it into a territory where it was like between severe and extreme. It's not going to necessarily make it all the way extreme, but halfway between is definitely going to be more dangerous than it seems. So you could either adjust for one character being missing by taking out whatever you added to go up from 4 to 5. You could have a botted version of that character play and just remember to let them use their healer's tools when you do. Or you can just deal with the fact that it's harder than normal and maybe adjust only the more severe encounter and make there be a fewer encounters, because now the encounters will be kind of like halfway to the next difficulty level up, and the lows will be between low and moderate, and that's like probably fine. The moderates between moderate and severe also probably fine, except for if there's a lot of them, and then the severe being between severe and extreme is going to be where it gets rough.
Yeah.
So you can just do it case by case, or like take out the severe and make one of the ones that used to be moderate the final encounter somehow by putting in a tweaked version of the last boss into it, or weaken the severe only and make that the last encounter. Don't tweak any of the others, but remove some encounters. There's some ways to do it without having to do too much.
Now, another question in chat. Any opinion on using average damage instead of rolling for monsters? Now, unless I'm mistaken, the bestiaries don't list average damage for monsters. So, like, I kind of don't have that choice.
Yes,
but if
generally you're expected to roll. I mean, you can figure out what the average is and use it, especially if you built monsters using the spread, using like the spread of stats that are in the game mastery guide. They tell you an average and some dice expressions, so you could just use the average if you're designing your own monster without ever even converting that into dice. And I mean, you can. Generally, it's more interesting to roll, because otherwise it leads to some like really weird gameplay mechanics where like players know exactly how much damage it's going to deal. So it's like, oh, this is going to like take me down to exactly 0. So 1 point of healing is, I need 1 point of healing.
Yeah,
or where it's like this one is going to, or be like this one is guaranteed not to drop me, so I don't need a heal right now. And if I get hit twice, I would have gone down no matter what. Whereas when it's kind of unknown, you might want to put in a buffer, so there's a very low chance of being dropped, but you still might be dropped.
Right.
So it can lead to some bizarre metagaming if you just always have the same amount, but you totally can. The system works just fine other than that.
It's just a question of gameplay and mechanics. Yeah. What are things or rules in Pathfinder 2 that need a little tweak or improvement?
I mean, they're doing a whole remaster with a bunch of tweaks and changes. So I would say that take a look at that, and there could be some things in there.
Do you know what?
There's some that I thought could use changes, but that stayed because of D&D tradition, like druids not having metal armor. What's up with that? And that's going away in the remaster.
Yeah.
Or like wizards not having simple weapons, because wizards used to have just only staff and a crossbow and a few others. Now they're going to get all the simple weapons. So there were like a few things that were done because like the playtesters or people who played in earlier editions wanted something that then maybe they later realized after playing PF2, maybe we should have just not asked for that and just done what the designers were thinking of. And I would say in some cases, those are like minor but useful things to change, and the remaster is changing some of those.
Yeah, they're getting rid of alignment too, and that reminds me of the spell Divine Lance, which does, I think, good damage, or maybe you can choose
it sounds
evil.
like they're changing it to like spirit damage or something that's either holy or unholy and can deal extra damage against fiends.
Okay.
I don't know. There's been previews. We're in the middle of PaizoCon. Anyone who's watching who's from PaizoCon, represent. I mean, we're here at this exact time because it's right after the PaizoCon streams ended for the day. There was tons of spoilers and other reveals.
Okay. So they talked about a lot of the changes that are going to be in the remastered, or what is it? Remastered or Unchained? What are they calling it?
It's called it's just called the Player Core, but like the project is the remaster project mainly, which it means is getting rid of OGL terms because of the whole OGL scare. They want to be absolutely sure that nothing weird happens later on. And Creative Commons has some issues for people who want to add their own stuff to it that it would be IP, like the worlds and things like that. So to get away from OGL, the remaster is going to move to the Orc license. And so it's still the same edition, more or less, although there's a lot of changes, more than I expected, have been revealed here. So like, there's a lot of what looked like balance changes, and I thought it was just going to be to remove the OGL. But ultimately, it's so much of the same content that you can see, like, the authors on the covers of the book are the same people. Like, the Game Mastery guy, or the GM Core, which is, like, the revamped game mastery guide says Logan Bonner and Mark Seifter. And I was not on the remaster project because I was already working at Roll for Combat, but so many of my words are just still in it that I wrote during the other time that it's enough to constitute authorship by Paizo's standards, which is a certain percentage of the book being written by one person.
Yeah. Are they saying that it's like compatible, backwards compatible, forwards compatible and stuff with like the current Pathfinder 2 rules? Do you know what they said about that?
So it's supposedly is like the same edition, so it's just automatically compatible and optional, so you won't have to do it. But there have been a few things they revealed that seem to be like they're going to shift the balance of things a little more than that I want to dig into when I see the final release. But it's supposedly super duper compatible, so compatible that you can just keep playing without even buying the new ones if you want.
Okay.
But the new ones will help like remove alignment because that's an OGL thing, and like the spell schools because that's an OGL thing.
Okay.
Like, or it would be hard to protect in court. It was like, why do you have these that are exactly named conjuration and enchantment and illusion and necromancy? Like each one of those is a type of magic from real world tradition, but having exactly these 8 and calling them schools with that exact name is a little sus. So like things like that aren't going to be in there, but like having them exist in your game if you want to keep having them won't throw you off either. So I think it's going to work okay. One of the main things I think people are going to have to take into account is encounter pacing, because they are doing a thing that lets you refill up your entire focus point pool, which, if for people who've not played, is extremely powerful 18th level feat, but just at first level. So that means that if you let the players have 30 minutes and they have a 3-size pool, they'll be able to do some pretty strong stuff every encounter. I think that might change things. However, I haven't seen the book. I've only heard the announcement, so they might have put some safeguards in place to prevent that in the final book. So,
but can't you get your focus points back with just 10 minutes though? Now,
you get back 1 focus point with 10 minutes, and if you have to you can't refocus again after that until you spend them. So you can never refill more than 1 right now.
Gotcha.
Even if you have 3, if you spend 1, you can refill back to 3. Spend 1, refill back to 3. But if you spend all 3, you refill back to 1, and you'll never have more than 1 again the rest of that day.
Okay.
But they're changing it so you could just go 1, 2, 3. Now I'm back to 3. And in that case, you'll be able to do 3 every fight if you could do a little bit longer of a short rest every fight. Now, there may be nobody's seen the final text. There may be other precautions that prevent that. If not, then that drastically changes the power of groups depending on the GM's abilities and decision of how long to let them rest, which makes it a little swingier, but possibly will make older material like a lot easier to beat. We'll have to see. Most of the other changes they've been saying, they don't really change the balance or the gameplay at all, other than quality of life improvements, removing some of the OGL stuff, putting in like new spells that are not the OGL names, but that fill the same niche. Like I think they said like Vampire Feast instead of Vampiric Touch or something like that.
Okay.
So like fill the same niche, but is not technically the OGL spell name.
No, Magic Missile's probably out.
Probably like Force Missile, right?
Yeah. Force Missile. That makes sense. Yeah. We have a super chat here. Terwax says, a bit off topic, so feel free to ignore, but I looked through the ancestries for Pathfinder 2 Extended. I think that's the new one coming out or something. And there seemed to not be a Drow one for PCs. Did I miss it, or has it not been added as an option? Do you know anything about that?
Okay, so Drow, I actually know a lot about that because today's stream that Paizo just did recently is an Into the Darklands stream. And there already wasn't a Drow in the non-remastered PF2 Ancestry, and there definitely won't be now because it's an OGL name. And so they said they still exist, but they're going to be de-emphasized and not really appear in published adventures because they'll be de-emphasized to be in only a small portion of the Darklands in the underground area, and Serpent Folk and some of the ones that are not OGL are going to become more of the main threat, and they'll focus on the already existing Cavern Elves who are non-evil underground elves that you could play even from the core rulebook as like another option, which avoids both the OGL and just the in general. This underground thing is very dark skinned, even though like usually when you're underground, you get like albinism because there's not a lot of sunlight and is super evil. Can kind of avoid that and the OGL.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's
so
happened...
they did. So someone in chat said call them dark elves or shadow elves or something. Yeah, exactly. There's cavern elves. They have a cool name. I can't remember what it was. It was like just some in-world name with several consonants. If I look it up, I can probably find it.
I think part of what's happening is because you see Wizards of the Coast doing certain moves, to, I don't know, politically correct moves, you might say. There's an assumption perhaps that when Paizo does certain things, that they're motivated by the same reason, right? For instance, if they take out alignment, the assumption is, oh, it must be because something PC about alignment that isn't okay or something. Or if there are no longer any drow, it's because, having an inherently evil race that's dark skinned is somehow racist or something. Therefore, we're going to take it out. You know what I mean? So
to be fair, drow are pretty racist compared to some of the other things that are out there.
Yeah, my point
that are more like can get a more niche and that there could be more discussion about. But of all of those, drow are
sure. Yeah, I'm not commenting on that. My only point is that I think there's an assumption that could be made that Paizo's motivated by those reasons as opposed to the OGL thing. So the
OGL is just flat out. I would say this: the OGL is the reason that they are definitely not going to ever have them again.
Right.
But the problematic portrayal of them, which Pathfinder itself is guilty of in earlier products, is the reason we didn't see them before the OGL thing. Because not because they were never going to do them at all, but because people at Paizo were thinking really hard and they were like, we know people like them.
Yeah.
And they're in the world and we want to portray them in a way that is not problematic. And we think that it can be done. There's nothing that's going to guarantee that it will be, but it's tricky to do. And so they would have been thinking about it, right? And trying to figure it out. But then the OGL comes like, oh, well, we can't do it at all now.
Right.
So
yeah. Makes sense.
Let me be very clear, though, that like WotC does things occasionally that are that I would say are very good in terms of getting more different voices that are marginalized into writing games, which has been a serious problem and still is in the industry, like Radiant Citadel. But the amount that Paizo does that kind of stuff is beyond WotC. So I would say that definitely anybody who is like doesn't want to deal with WotC because they think that WotC is being like too respectful of like other viewpoints and is being like too politically correct and be like, I'll get Paizo for that reason. I just say don't. You should stay away from Paizo. As someone who supports them in that, Paizo is much more so has been like blazing trails, and it'll be funny because Paizo will do something like tons of things to try to get inclusion, but in part because also they're good at doing it in a way that doesn't is not made to like shove things into people's face and just point and say, look, I did it just to show you that I'm doing it, but instead just make it a natural part of the game and the world that just feels like it's supposed to be there. But Paizo puts in much more often. And then when Wizards does it once, they'll get like 10 articles online that makes it into a big thing.
That's because
it's like nobody's ever done this.
Yeah, that's because it's Wizards and D&D.
Pathfinder fans will kind of raise their eyebrows and be like, okay, sure, nobody's ever done this.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that because like I haven't noticed things brazenly like in Paizo stuff, Pathfinder 2, it's calling my attention to the fact that they're trying to do that. That's
because Paizo is just putting it in there and making it try to be accessible and approachable to everyone in a way that is meant to like be diplomatic and try to like help people help teach and help people learn how to do things that way, as opposed to being like immediately putting everyone who's reading it in, like it's something hard. We worked on it very hard, like certain sidebars, and even then some people said that like the rules that talk about like this game is for all, please don't exclude people from the game or something like that. And it didn't like, it was written, like we rewrote it like 4 times because it doesn't accuse anyone of assuming that they aren't going to do that. Instead, it assumes people are going to do that, because most people, hopefully, I think are. And it just is written in a way to try to help you do that, instead of being like, we think you're not going to include people, so we're so shame on you. It's more of a like, include people is awesome. We know you that it's hard, can be hard sometimes. Here are some tips for being able to be more inclusive. And here's a baseline that we think Pathfinder products usually use, but your group might use something else, and that's fine for your group. But if you don't, talk about it before the session. Other things like that that kind of naturally fit in, or characters who just have various different. Here's a good example. I don't know if you read Mwangi Expanse source book, but the difference between that and Chult in terms of a jungle-ish area that is like vaguely African themed is that Chult is very much presented as like, this is a savage, wild place that is just full of weird monsters and primitive cultures, and people don't really live there so much as go there to go on adventures. Whereas Mwangi Expanse, it's just like, there's just cool stuff there. There's civilizations and people who live there, and it doesn't like, it's not like spending all of the pages telling people that they need to think about that. There's one sidebar that talks about the fact, like, this is a place where lots of people live, and then it shows rather than tells. And so that's what I think some people have found makes it work well for them. That's not to say there aren't people who still get upset. They'll be like, I don't like this sidebar here. You'll definitely see discourse about it. But I think that Paizo does it. They do it a lot, but they do it really well.
Yeah, somebody in chat made a really good quote. They said, Paizo is not ticking off the old fans to please the new, unlike Wizards of the Coast. And I think that resonates a little bit with me, because I like, along the lines of what you're saying, you know, it seems like, from what I've seen, Paizo's doing a better job of it, like you're saying. Whereas Wizards of the Coast tends to not implement it very smoothly, you know, and it seems very blatant. Like, for instance, I might be reading an adventure or something, and I'm like, oh, well, there is your token X, because they had to get that in there to like do whatever their agenda is. You know what I mean? So. Yeah, but in Paizo, it seems like you're saying.
Paizo, it's just like, you'll just see NPCs that are like that, and it's not, you're not gonna see that it checks off a box. There might be like 4 of like, if it makes sense, like, right, if you're in the Mwangi Expanse, almost everybody there is going to be some kind of ancestry or culture that's based on different African themes, and that, like, African American authors contributed to try to bring in their voices and ideas into that. And I read like this really beautiful thing in like the author blog about one of the authors who was she wanted her mom to read it because like she had written into it, and her mom saw like this dark-skinned elf that was not like, it wasn't a drow, it was just a surface elf that was dark-skinned and lived in the Mwangi Expanse, and like started crying because she was like, that she really thought the portrayal was like really like a really beautiful picture, and that it like was something that she just didn't expect to be able ever be able to see. So like, yeah, I think Paizo does a good job of inclusion and inclusivity that makes you feel like you want to join in with it.
Yeah, that's cool. And since they're not in your face, the people who just want to get a cool game and run a game can just focus on doing that, and they, you know,
yeah, it's just like, it'll just be casually slipped in there, and it is there for the inclusion that will help with visibility for people who are just going to have that moment, like the author's mother did, but also just like sometimes you might not even find out about it, like the fact that like a particular NPC is agender. It's like, they're not going to come up to you and say, I am Demarty, who is an agent, I think a agender character from one of our adventures in Roll for Combat. I am Demarty and I am agender. Like they are. It's part of their identity, and it's just in there. It doesn't just sort of like stick out, like you said, as being like, look, we put in one. It's just, there's enough that that it just feels like it's part of the world, it's part of the setting, and it unapologetically is inclusive, but in a way that I think also includes everyone and makes you want to engage in it. So do we have any more questions from you or chat about About pitfalls, I have one that I've seen a lot.
Yeah, well, let's,
because we're about to end.
Yeah,
soon,
we are.
right?
So really quick, we are going to draw the winner to our giveaway before we end. So this is your last chance to sign up for the giveaway. We'll put a link in the chat for you. Basically, you can get a copy of Into the Fae, a level 1 to 5 adventure module. It's really cool. I have to say that because I wrote the book. But we'll draw the winner of that giveaway at the end of the stream. So sign up for that. And then, all right, Mark, what is your pitfall?
So my number one pitfall that I've seen is related to things we talked about earlier in the stream a lot. So I think we can do it quickly in these last 6 minutes. It is GMs who, this is completely reasonable that they do this, but they've played 5e. They may have played other systems too. Maybe they haven't played 5e. They played Pathfinder first edition. Doesn't matter. Any of those editions where the challenge rating system doesn't really actually predict the challenge.
Oh, yes.
They're like, my group crushes deadly encounters. I have to throw the hardest of the hard. So then they get to Pathfinder 2 and say, I know my group. I know these guys. I know what kind of builds they make, what kind of tactics they use. So I know it says severe is hard and the extreme is a 50-50 chance of dying, but I also saw what it said in 5e about deadly. I'm just going to throw something that's like 2 levels higher than an extreme encounter because that's what I normally have to do in 5e. And then they TPK. And then they keep doing it. They keep TPKing. They're like, well, I don't understand what's happening. And you're laughing because it may sound like I'm just making this up, but this is like weirdly common. And you'll see it on Reddit. I think a week or 2 ago, there was someone whose group was like, I don't understand what's happening. And the GM didn't say that they were doing this. But when the player was like, it's in Abomination Vaults. And so it was one of the adventure paths. People were like, okay, what's going on? And the player's like, okay, so we're fighting this thing. It was this level and it had this much AC. And they're like, whoa, dude, your GM like upraised the things by multiple levels more than they were supposed to be. Yeah. And then the player's like, oh, well, he was a 5e GM. He's probably used to it because our group always stomped over everything in 5e. So the number one pitfall that I would say is immediately adjusting the system based on something you did in another system without even checking to see if the new system is trustworthy in certain ways that the other system wasn't, is the most common way to get some very weird results. And it's easy to avoid. Just like use it as is a little bit, and you'll see right away. You saw right away when you threw. You were like, "Wait, low news are not actually as threatening as it seems. They're almost kind of trivial. Maybe I'll throw more severes." Yeah, I was, and that wasn't even as much as what this other person I'm talking about from Reddit did. You actually at least threw all the encounters you threw were reasonable for their level. There were just kind of a lot of them. They didn't have a lot of time to rest in between, and you took away their poor healers' tools. But
no, I didn't. It wasn't on his character sheet.
Oh, okay. So the end result is he didn't have the healer still, so you did it right.
Yeah, like you did it right. It wasn't on his character sheet, man. I'm like,
to be fair, if he trained in the thing and was planning on using it, he probably should have bought it. But that's a beginning player mistake.
Well, the player. I think the player wasn't at the game session. And we were just doing the best we could, and so we didn't know if he had bought them or not. And
that's what you said before, but I didn't hear the update that you checked his character sheet later and he didn't have it.
Oh yeah, it wasn't his character sheet. So we were like, does he have it or not? And my ruling was, listen, at first level, healer's tools are kind of expensive. So
they are pretty expensive.
So if he doesn't have it written down, then I'm going to rule that he doesn't have them. So that was what we did in the moment. But I was also intentionally like, boundary testing to see what would happen. Probably maybe should have done that at first level. But
I mean, you can, but just let people know that you are. It's like I said before on the death test and the play test. You can't learn how well healing, survivability, and defense options work unless you boundary test. Yeah. It's a problem in PF1. There was a completely busted defensive ability that negated any attack. And a lot of people didn't realize it was strong. They'd be like, it's not that strong. I rarely ever use it because they were just killing everything. They never actually had to face anything of any challenge. So it wasn't useful to them to automatically negate any attack because no one would get to attack them. Yeah. Whereas if you stress tested it in an encounter against very difficult things, you would find that it was actually way outsized for the ability to how much it took to get that feature. And so similarly, it's useful to do as long as you know that you're stress testing and you don't pretend it's a normal game.
Yeah. Well, I didn't tell my players. I just did it.
Yeah. Well, but in your mind, you knew that. Now, not telling your players can be an issue It definitely the playtest kind of said that you might not tell, maybe don't tell your players about that death test, and it made a lot of players really mad. But they weren't told in advance by their GM, and the GM knew secretly that they were going to die, and they all thought, "What? We're failing, And the GM's like, "It's okay." After they died, I just wanted you to know it was doomed from the start, and that some people got upset. So I've learned from that. Maybe you should tell the players if it's a death test.
Well, I didn't make it so overwhelmingly hard though. I didn't make it crazy. That was
yours was easier by far than the death test from the play test, because that one had like 3 severe and an extreme and like 4 or 5 moderate.
And my players and I, we like debriefed that whole thing after the TPK, and we determined that this makes me feel a little bit worse too. The reason they TPK'd was that they didn't have healer's tools, because if they had healer's tools, instead of casting spells to get patched up between encounters, they would have used the 10 wounds or treat wounds. And then during that final encounter with the werewolf that was crazy hard, they would have had healing spells, and that would have kept them up, and they probably would have been just fine. So that was our like final determination. But I think the point too, drawing off from that too, is that this is something that I'll see when people come to a new game system too, is that they immediately want to homebrew stuff. Like, I'll get to Pathfinder 2 and I'm immediately homebrewing everything. Like, I'm changing like everything, and I'm tweaking and changing and stuff. And it's like,
look, I love modding the game. I'm guilty. I mod the game all the time. That's why I put all these variant rules in the game mastery guide, because I want to mod the game. But you may want to learn what it's like without the mod.
Exactly. That's my point. I feel like it's like, you should probably play with the rules as written for a good chunk of time before you start tweaking them, Now, in my case, I'm designing the adventures and stuff, so that's a little bit different. But if I were to go in and just start like, I'm designing my own monster, and I decide not to follow the guides in the game mastery guide, I'm just like, I'm just going to do whatever I want but I don't know the game system. I don't understand how it works. So it's like, how am I going to design something that is balanced? Assuming that I'm trying to go for balance, you know what I mean? So I feel like you gotta like play it for a while to understand it before you can just like swoop in and be like, for instance, if you don't like the fact that you have to split up movement, or you can't split up movement, and you just come in and be like, that's stupid in Pathfinder 2. In my games, you can split up movement and you just change that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're gonna miss that a lot of stuff becomes pretty useless that used to be useful, and a lot of things become more dangerous that used to have tactics you could use based on movement.
Right, because you come in and you make a change because it seems good to you, but you don't understand that there was solid game design rationale when the game designers made it that way. You got to play it for a while before you could, like, for instance, 5th edition, I didn't start making things crazy, overpoweringly deadly until I'd played it for a while, and I realized, if you don't do that, like, everything is too easy, so you kind of have to. What else are you going to do? You know what I mean? When you experience it first, and then you start, like, doing stuff. But
absolutely. So that's basically my big pitfall to avoid, is just figure out what it's like at the baseline. Look, I love homebrewing. I love house rolling. Do it immediately as soon as you've discovered the baseline and you're confident with it, but do a few sessions with the baseline so you know what you're basing it off of, is my recommendation. And it sounds like for that thing that you did, like, Luke, it was not the thing I'm talking about where they threw extreme +2 right off the bat because they assumed that they would go. Yours were all within bounds, other than the fact that you gave them maybe a little bit many encounters, but that was very possible, and you saw that the lower being easy, and it was ultimately player error for not taking those healer's tools, because if he took the skill feat to have battle medicine in combat that can only be used with healer's tools, he probably should have taken the healer's tools.
And he might have actually purchased them. We just didn't know. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Okay. So it was like you had part, but not all of his sheets.
It was something like that. Yeah, I think what it might have been.
You had like his stats, but not his gear, or he left some of his base numbers. I can tell you that if he had battle medicine, then either he definitely had them, the healer's tools, or he made a huge mistake because he made a major character defining choice of background to even get battle medicine at first level, unless he was a rogue or investigator, and then did not take the tools to be able to use it. That would be equivalent to making someone who's a master at lockpicks and had no lockpicks or something like that.
My players are all smart guys, and so I bet you now in retrospect, he probably did have them, now that we've had time to really think and analyze about it, he probably had them. But I think we had his character sheet with the stats, but it wasn't fully filled out and didn't have his equipment or something. So we just made the best ruling we could at the time, and they all died because of it. But what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, we have the winner for the giveaway.
Oh, who won?
Yes, it is Evan Basnaw. So, Evan Basnaw, I will be sending you an email. You're going to get a copy of Into the Fae, and we'll get that sent out to you. So, congratulations, sir. And we're going to end it there for the night. So, thank you, Mark, for coming on. I really appreciate it. So, very, very
We had
cool.
some great questions from chat, some great questions from you, Luke, and I hope that those answers really help people who are changing around, starting Pathfinder 2. Maybe people who have played Pathfinder 2 for a while, but starting GMing and are worried about pitfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a couple notes that I took because I'm like all about the designing adventures and how many encounters and to not kill my characters again, maybe, possibly. So, so, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we shall see you next time. Have a wonderful evening. And I gotta find my button. The buttons are always hard to find because they're like on multiple different screens and stuff. All right, bye.